That's 42 million.
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
Sold. Thank you very much.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
My God, there's a lot at stake with this one.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye. I don't believe it.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue.
It's like a challenge. Who am I?
But not every painting is quite what it seems.
Just the sort of thing you might associate with a faked painting.
It's a journey that can end in joy.
It is indeed by John Constable.
Oh, brilliant.
Wonderful.
Or bitter disappointment.
The work is not by Henry Moore. So sorry.
In this episode, we're investigating a whodunit with a difference.
Whoever designed it did so with a master's eye.
Can we find out who painted this dramatic image of Christ and help one woman in her quest to prove her late husband was right?
Ian certainly felt it was a very important work and that there was a story to be told about it.
I'm with him.
It's a journey that takes us from Scotland to Belgium and the beguiling world of Flemish art that was once the most prolific in Europe.
It's just magnificent, isn't it?
In one of our toughest investigations yet, we'll discover just how difficult it can be to identify the artists behind Flemish Old Masters.
This is highest quality, and we still don't know the name.
My goodness, this is all making me feel slightly worried.
Can we solve the mystery of who created this epic work of art?
Are you any closer to finding out who painted it?
No.
London, the National Gallery, one of the world's great treasure houses of art.
It would be quite something, wouldn't it, if we investigated a painting that ended up hanging on these hallowed walls?
Well, it's not impossible. I mean, there's even a Raphael hanging here that was found in an obscure back corridor.
Although justly famous for its Italian masterpieces, the gallery also holds an impressive collection of old masters from Northern Europe. Referred to as the Northern Renaissance, this stupendous altarpiece is one of its jewels.
It's very elaborate, isn't it? And there's so many figures crammed in there. So why have you brought me to look at this?
Because we have a rather interesting email from a viewer. Have a read.
You've invited viewers to submit paintings which might be a suitable subject for investigation. We would be grateful if you would consider the Lamentation to be such a subject. The painting is in the Church of John the Baptist, Port Glasgow. The work is recognised and accepted as an Antwerp Mannerist, but no certain identification of the painting was made.
The Antwerp Mannerists were a group of artists working in the southern Netherlands in the early 16th century. And Jan de Beer, the artist behind this picture, was amongst the most prominent.
So the painting referred to in this email, then, could be at least 500 years old.
And that is the problem when it comes to this school of art. A lot of the artists were anonymous. We just don't know their names. So as a result, we're still, in many senses, feeling our way. This, I think, is going to take us to the Low Countries, on which subject I don't think I've ever heard you speak Flemish.
I don't think you ever will.
How could a centuries-old work from the Low Countries have ended up in Scotland on the banks of the River Clyde? And crucially, who painted it? We've travelled to Port Glasgow to the Church of St. John the Baptist.
Does this bring back a few memories, Philip? The walk to church on a Sunday morning?
It does. I used to go to a church very like this every Sunday evening as an altar boy.
Been to confession lately?
Gosh, it's so rare in a Catholic church in Britain to find an old master of this impact, of this quality.
The way the arms of Christ just stretch across the painting, there's real drama, isn't there?
It was a viewer named Ian MacDonald who originally contacted us about the painting. Sadly, Ian died in 2021. But we've arranged to meet his widow, Marjorie, and the church caretaker, Jean Sweeney.
Hello.
Hi, Marjorie, Jean. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
We're just admiring this magnificent painting. This is obviously Christ just brought down from the cross. Philip, tell us a bit more about what we're looking at.
Well, it's a really powerful expression of grief. This is the lowest moment in the Passion of Christ. He's been crucified. His body is there on the ground. His mother swooning behind. This is the cathartic moment. The resurrection has yet to come.
And how long have you known this picture, Jean?
Well, I've known it from I was a child, about 10.
So you've been looking at it all those years?
Yeah.
And do you like it?
No.
No.
Absolutely not. When I was growing up, it was a scary thing to look at. A dead man just lying there.
Gosh. And where does it normally hang?
Normally hangs at the back of the church, just on the left-hand side.
That's a gloomy spot for it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
All the congregation looking forward and ignoring it.
Do you have any idea when this painting came to the church?
No, I've got no idea how it got here, but the inscription on the frame says it was the Readors, 1854 till 1895.
A reredos is a piece of religious decoration in the form of a hanging, painting or sculpture positioned behind the altar. So the inscription tells us the work once hung above the most sacred part of the church. Its potential importance did not go unnoticed by Marjorie's husband, Ian.
What does it mean to you, Marjorie?
Well, part of what it means to me is what my late husband felt about it. He was an art history lecturer and he was asked to investigate it. He did quite a bit of work, but never managed to find out who painted it.
Did he get any sense of where it might have come from, what its provenance was?
He felt that it was a Flemish work, possibly 16th century.
Which makes absolute sense. I mean, Netherlandish painting of the 16th century was a very fertile time.
If this painting comes from the 1500s, then it has its roots in the Low Countries during the Flemish Golden Age, when cultural and economic activity flourished in Flanders, the Dutch-speaking region of modern-day Belgium. The port city of Antwerp was the commercial centre of Western Europe, where artists flocked to make a name for themselves. Ornate religious art was celebrated, and emperors, monarchs, and wealthy merchants paid huge sums to commission works to adorn Europe's great churches and cathedrals. Could this intriguing oil painting be a lost work by one of the great masters of Northern Europe? Or is it a much lesser work?
What about value, Philip? I mean, it's tricky at this very early stage, but can you put a value on this?
Well, I'm glad you said tricky at this really early stage, because it is. You know, we haven't got a name to it yet. However, we could be talking up to £100,000.
Gosh.
But
There's always a but.
without an artist's name, we may be talking little more than a tenth of that.
So, Jean, if it does turn out to be up to £100,000, what do you think the church will do with it?
I would like to think they would sell it. Nobody notices it. Nobody misses it.
And what about you, Marjorie?
Well, Ian certainly wasn't particularly interested in money, but he felt it was a very important work and that there was a story to be told about it.
I'm with him. The quality and the power of it is such that if we can place it in time, if we can give it an artist's name, some more of its mystery, its allure, I think, will work upon us.
Indeed.
Ian first began his quest to find out the truth about this painting 30 years ago. Since his death, Marjorie's been keen to carry on his work.
Marjorie, we're here because of Ian, of course, your late husband, and his quest to find out more about the painting.
Yes.
So tell me a bit about him.
Well, he was an art history lecturer, which is how I got to know him. He loved to share his knowledge.
How did the painting come to his attention then?
Well, his late brother-in-law, Bishop John Moane, was the Bishop of Paisley. He asked Ian if he would investigate it.
Did he keep any documentation, any correspondence relating to the research that he was doing?
Yes, there's quite a thick file of all the letters and photographs. He also tried to identify how it had come here.
Because, of course, that's the other big mystery, isn't it?
Yes.
After several painstaking years, Ian was unable to solve this whodunit. Reluctantly, he abandoned his research. It was only while watching Fake or Fortune that his hopes were reignited.
He was always so impressed with the way you did things, the way you x-rayed things, you analysed paint and things that he could never have done. And so he thought, well, there's an opportunity possibly to identify the artist.
And here we are.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that Ian is not here to take part in this journey that we're about to embark on, this painting that he cared so much about.
Yes, he would have relished the opportunity to debate about it and find out how it had come here.
Well, you're carrying on his quest for him.
Yes, that's true, but in a way I feel a bit of an imposter because he was the one that did all the work and in fact I'm the fake.
What, a Fake or Fortune? Definitely not. You're carrying it on in his memory and hopefully we'll find the answers he wanted.
Well, thank you, and I hope you do find the answers.
We have a huge challenge ahead of us, but we're determined to continue Ian's quest. To kick off our investigation, I've sent the picture to the Kelvin Centre for Conservation and Cultural Heritage Research at the University of Glasgow. Before we make a start on the scientific analysis, I want to take a closer look.
This is very much the sort of painting you would have encountered as you crossed Europe in the 16th century in a Catholic church. And I think it's terribly important to get a sense of how one might have seen it in the darkness of a church interior, the only light being stained glass just filtering through the windows or possibly flickering candles. This is an image designed to move you. What is clear is that this picture has been beautifully designed. You start in the left-hand corner with the figure of John looking in, and then your eye bobs along the top, and then you slip right down to the bottom left, and then up the eye goes again. It whirls around. Whoever designed it did so with a master's eye. But as you get closer and begin to start picking it apart, I'm beginning to feel different messages, different sort of stylistic accents. Look at Mary Magdalene. I mean, one of the first things I note is her dress, which incidentally is beautifully painted, more delicately, as it happens, than a lot of the other areas in the picture. And to my mind, is much more suggestive of Italian painting, of the South. And in contrast, look at the figure of John in the far left-hand corner. The painting is much more opaque, more solid. It feels almost as if this artist is looking in one direction and then another. Whoever painted this picture was familiar with early Netherlandish painting of the 1500s. But it also feels to me like an artist who's seen the great masters of Italy, the likes of Raphael and others, and has fused them together.
While Philip gets to know the Port Glasgow picture, I'm following up on the leads left by Marjorie's late husband, Ian.
So this is Ian's file with all sorts of correspondence in it. Not much in the way of provenance leads, but there is one note that he's written here. Early parish priest in Port Glasgow was a Fleming, by which he means was from Flanders in Belgium. So that's something to look into. Rather helpfully, Ian's drawn up a list of 7 potential names for the painting, most of which I've never heard of, let alone know how to pronounce. We've got Ambrosius Franken, Hieronymus Franken, Franz Franken, I assume they're all related, Martin de Vos, Franz Floris, someone called the Flemish Raphael, and then Jan Massis.
7 names. Could one of them have painted the Port Glasgow picture? At the gallery in London, we're taking a closer look at the contenders.
So, here's our painting in Port Glasgow, and Ian has left us a list of 7 potential suspects in this ecclesiastical whodunit. So let's start with the first one. The man known as the Flemish Raphael turns out to be this artist, Michiel Coxey, apparently very famous in his time.
Coxey is a real name to conjure with. He was the first Flemish artist to go to Italy and establish a career there. He immersed himself in the works of Michelangelo and Raphael, and he brought this style back to the Netherlands, hence his name, the Flemish Raphael.
Next up, Jan Masses.
I usually associate masses with non-religious subject matter, but let's just keep him in the mix.
Okay. Then we have this man, Frans Floris.
Another big name, and another one of those artists who went to Italy. When he returned to Antwerp, he became a huge success.
And I've looked into him as well, and he trained many of the next generation of Flemish painters, including the next candidate on our list, Martin de Vos. He was a protege of Frans Floris. Then we have the Franken brothers. They sound a bit like a band, don't they? Frans, Hieronymus, and Ambrosius. No portrait for him, I'm afraid.
I mean, they were a massive dynasty, a sort of family firm, which wasn't rare at that date. Definitely wants to keep in the mix.
OK, so we've got our lineup of 7 suspects, and all we need to do now is try and work out which one of these it could be.
But we've got to be careful here, because we're dealing with artists who ran workshops, picture-making factories in which many assistants and pupils could be working on the same painting. We've got to make sure that we're dealing with the work of a master rather than one of his minions.
In order to understand whether the painting was the work of many hands or one, I'm travelling to the Belgian city of Antwerp. In the 1500s, it was a thriving commercial centre for the production of art. The city had many workshops where painters came together under the direction of a master. The most famous master of them all was Peter Paul Rubens. Today, his workshop has been carefully preserved.
Hi, Natasha.
Hello.
I've arranged to meet Natasha Peters, an expert on painters and their workshops in Antwerp.
So is this where Rubens lived?
Yes, so actually the house was divided into his living quarters and his workshop, and so he could pop from one to the other very easily.
This place was once a creative powerhouse of Flemish art.
So this is a gallery now, Natasha, but originally this was Rubens' workshop, or one of them.
Yes, well, actually it's the only workshop left in Antwerp, and originally there would have been hundreds of workshops, so this is quite special, quite exceptional. And had you come in here in the 17th century, you would have found it filled with life, with apprentices, with journeymen, and everybody was working on paintings in various stages of completion, and apprentices were drawing, making copies, etc., so filled with life.
The artist's workshop was a slick operation. At the helm, the master painter. Not just a highly skilled artist, but a businessman who ran his studio like a picture production line. Assistants were employed to prepare panels and grind pigments with oil to keep a steady stream of paint flowing. Young apprentices would learn their craft by sketching plaster casts and copying works. They would be trained in the master's style. To increase production, the master employed journeymen, freelance painters who were paid by the day and travelled from workshop to workshop.
Journeymen are very valuable assets to any workshop, and that's also the secret of Antwerp's success. It's people working together, one day for one painter, the next day for another painter. So that's really why they could arrive at this huge production and why Antwerp's paintings were shipped all over the world.
There's one unfinished work of art on display that provides a rare glimpse into the way a master and his workshop collaborated. Could the Port Glasgow picture have been made in the same way?
Looking at this painting then, for example, how much of this would have been journeyman and how much Rubens?
Well, Rubens thought up the composition, worked it out in a very sketchy stage with the contours, but because, of course, it's not finished, we can see that the background is already filled in by another hand. And it might well have been that Rubens would not finish this painting himself, but would leave the work to his assistant.
Wow. So how much of his paintings did Rubens actually do then?
Well, Rubens was a very involved master. He was an artist, but he was also a businessman. He was in England for months, in Spain, so he went all over Europe. And the workshop turned out paintings just as if the master was there.
So I must ask, so if we look at Rubens today, it's quite possible that he did the odd brushstroke and that was it?
Or he designed it and then went off on a mission. And so the workshop turned out paintings as usual.
Well, in his absence?
Yes, in his absence. We are still not entirely sure how many paintings he actually made in his lifetime. And so that notion of that lone single master signing off his works does not apply here.
So when it comes to the picture that we're investigating then, and obviously what we do on Fake or Forged is we try and attribute it to one artist. Do you think we'll be able to do that?
No.
No.
No, I don't think so. No.
Natasha's scepticism shows just how hard we'll have to work to have any chance of identifying the artist who came up with the Port Glasgow picture.
Back in Glasgow at the Kelvin Centre, a team of experts have been carrying out a series of forensic tests on the painting.
It's interesting that this head is actually a lot paler, a lot more see-through.
Imaging techniques allow us to see beneath the surface layers of the paint, right down to the original underdrawing. Any evidence of changes, known in the business as pentimenti, could indicate the hand of a master.
What we're able to now make out are some significant alterations, some changes of direction midway. Look here, the knees of Christ. They're unquestionably different from the original lines. They've been altered. But if we look in the top left, there's something even more dramatic, and that's the head of John. Originally, John was in profile. You can see by that strong dark line that goes down his forehead. His eyes were tilted upwards. But now that's altered. The artist has angled John's head slightly towards us. And instead of the eyes glancing upwards, he's gazing into a sort of foreground, middle distance. I mean, why has the artist done this? Well, it's quite likely that in the process of putting the painting together, they felt it's not quite working. We need a bit more emotional connection. Who knows? But what it does show us is that the artist is thinking as they're going along. There's some sort of creative process. This isn't what you would expect from some copyist or from some student or apprentice. I think we're dealing with someone who really knows what they're doing.
It looks like there's a serious artist behind the Port Glasgow picture. But who could it be? I'm heading to Edinburgh in search of some expert help. I need to follow up on the list of potential candidates that Ian identified, so I've come to the National Galleries of Scotland. I'm meeting Senior Curator of Northern European Art, Dr. Tycho Seifert.
Tika, hello. Listen, thank you very much for helping us out with this.
Pleasure.
Can he help narrow down our search from the lineup of 7 suspects?
I've got a list of names, which I just want to run past you and see if any of these strike you as possible artists.
I would probably rule out the Franken brothers straight away. We're talking about a seriously big picture. The Frankens mostly are smaller. They tend to have more crowded, multi-figure compositions.
Right.
Martin de Vos doesn't sound likely either. I think some of what I said about the Frankens applies to him as well. He wouldn't be one of my prime candidates. I think Franz Flores and Jan Masseis, this is closer to this, definitely, also in terms of the Italianate aspect of the picture.
And then what about the Flemish Raphael, Michiel Coxey?
He was actually the first Fleming who worked in Italy for a considerable time. So in terms of absorbing the Italianate element, he's the artist of all those names, which I would put top on my list.
One of the things that strikes me going through Ian's research is just how difficult it's been to try and put any name to this painting. Why is it so difficult?
Not very many of the works are signed. This is, of course, very much different from what artists did later on, where you always find the signature somewhere. Have a look at this here, for example, Fiona. This is a super painting. We have no clue who the painter is. If you look at how he painted leaves and things, it looks like embroidery. So he was labeled the master of the embroidered foliage.
So no one knows the name of this artist. So the art world has come up with this fictitious name.
Correct.
Just to be able to describe him in some way.
This is highest quality, and we still don't know the name.
My goodness, this is all making me feel slightly worried about what we're going to do about our picture. And then what about how the painting could have got from Flanders to Scotland? Looking at Ian's notes, he talks about the painting being in Port Glasgow from 1854. And then he mentions early parish priest in Port Glasgow was a Fleming. I mean, that is all we've got. So, any ideas as to when it's likely to have come to Scotland?
Well, early could be very early. There are close relations between Scotland and Flanders from the 15th century onwards. But it could also be close to when the church opened and they wanted to give something to the church.
Wow. So that's a huge period of time that we have to investigate.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
With almost 500 years of provenance to consider and no obvious signature, the scale of the challenge facing us is daunting. Back in London at the gallery, we're taking a closer look at the artists who are still in contention.
So here is Ian's list of 7 potential suspects, and Tycho has ruled out 4 of them. So that leaves us with 3, Michiel Coxey, Jan Massees and Frans Floris.
I've got my doubts about Jan Massees.
Why?
Well, have a look at this. It's called A Merry Company, Carousing Peasants. This is typical of the type of painting that he was doing. In fact, he's been credited with being a pioneer of secular painting in the Low Countries.
Certainly, when you look at our painting, it's nothing like it. They're having a very jolly time. And of course, this is a heavily religious subject, isn't it?
I think Massees is definitely off the list.
OK, so then we're left with Michiel Coxey and Frans Floris. So I've done some digging into Coxey. Now, it turns out he moved in very elevated circles. He was a favourite of the Holy Roman Emperor. He was court painter to Philip II of Spain, who singled him out to paint frescoes in the Vatican in Rome. And then there's Frans Floris. Now, he was a big player as well. He was hugely successful, led this very extravagant lifestyle. He had a big influence on the Northern Renaissance, and he had a large workshop in Antwerp as well.
So we have 2 really very significant names to consider now at work in Antwerp in the 16th century.
Back at the Kelvin Centre, I'm keen to see if another scientific technique can help us date the wooden panel that the Port Glasgow picture is painted on. Dendrochronology is the process of dating wood by measuring the tree rings. Counting the rings will tell us how old the tree is, but measuring the distance between them creates a pattern in time, which can be used to identify not only when the tree was growing, but crucially, the likely date it was cut down. Looking at a cross-section of the Port Glasgow picture through a microscope reveals the bubble-like structures that make up the rings. Measuring these could reveal the earliest possible date the panel was made. Ian Tyers is one of the world's leading authorities on dendrochronology. Can he put a date to our picture?
How confident can we be at dating a painting by looking at the available tree rings?
These boards have got 150 or 200 rings in them. Most likely we can date this to within a decade or 2. In effect, each of these boards has a fingerprint in it that's a fingerprint in time and place.
That's a rather remarkable thought. What about these batons on the back, this bracing.
These are, unfortunately, a later addition to the panel. There's no original back left on the panel itself, and it's been planed down, and this cradle has been put on the back in order to strengthen it at some point.
Ouch. So all of that information that could have helped us, stamps, labels, what have you, they've just disappeared into the into the ether.
They've disappeared into the bin in the woodyard, yes.
Thankfully, dendrochronology can salvage some of the clues lost in restoration and tell us more than just the date of the panel.
There's many layers of information to come out of this. Does it date? Does it tell us where? And does it tell us which trees?
All material that we would find extremely useful and valuable.
Well, let's hope that it does produce some answers then.
While we wait and see if the Port Glasgow picture can be dated, I've come to the archives of the Archdiocese of Glasgow to follow up on the lead Ian left, that an early parish priest was a Fleming, a native of Flanders. Can the archives provide any evidence to show he was right?
I've got here the Scottish Catholic Directory, which is a list of all the parishes and their clergy. And on page 91, here is our church, Port Glasgow St. John's. And it mentions the first priest, a Reverend John Carolan. Now, he's actually from Ireland. He's not Flemish. So the connection to Flanders that Ian, Marjorie's husband's been talking about, it's not him. And then I've looked through all the priests that have been at St. John the Baptist, and none of them are from Flanders. So I can't find anything to substantiate Ian's theory there. I'm wondering if it's a red herring.
There's another lead in the form of the inscription on the frame. It says that the painting was the reredos in the church from 1854 until 1895, meaning it hung behind the altar. Could it have been a gift to mark the founding of the church?
In the directory, it details the opening of the church in 1854 on the 22nd of October. Of course, 1854 is the date on our painting. It says the church was so densely crowded that numbers were obliged to retire for want of room. It also mentions a rather intriguing name, a Mrs. Colonel Hutchison. And it says, the Catholics resident here have much reason to be grateful to this excellent lady for the great interest she has taken in their new church. And it turns out that her first name was Isabella. And in the Catholic archive, there is this rather sweet little portrait of her. So digging a bit deeper, I can see that she was born in 1780 in Port Glasgow, and she was the daughter of a merchant and the widow of a man called George Hutchison. Now, the place I found more information about George Hutchison is here, the Centre for the Study of the Legacies of British Slavery. So George Hutchison was a late lieutenant colonel in the service of the Honourable East India Company, which was a huge trading company that made much of its money off the back of slavery. So Isabella got some of her money from him, and she used that money for, it says here, erecting, completing and furnishing the residence for the Sisters of Mercy at Lauriston Gardens. That's a convent in Edinburgh. So the money came from a very dark place, and she used some of it for the Catholic Church, and this convent in particular. So I think that's something worth looking into.
I've asked Marjorie to join me at the Sisters of Mercy convent in Edinburgh to find out more about Isabella Hutchison. Did she donate the Port Glasgow picture to the church?
One of the many questions about your painting, Marjorie, is how did it come to be in Glasgow, in Port Glasgow, to be specific?
Yes, indeed, indeed.
So it might have something to do with this woman.
Ah.
This is Isabella Hutchison. We know that she was very wealthy. We know that she was a benefactor to the Catholic Church.
Right.
She also came from Port Glasgow and was at the church, St. John the Baptist, when it opened in 1854.
Oh, my goodness.
And there's more, because the Catholic Directory states that she paid for the furnishings in the church as well as the altar.
Right.
An entry in the Catholic Directory says the altar, tabernacle, chalice and ciborium, and all the altar linens and furnishings, together with vestments, all of which are very elegant and costly, were presented by her.
But if she paid for the altar, did she also pay for the altarpiece?
Could be, could be.
It's not proof, but it's quite convincing.
Yes, yes, it is.
And having spoken to the sisters here at the convent, I mean, they think given her relations with the Catholic Church and how much she gave the Catholic Church, that it is quite likely that she did the painting to the church as well.
Are you any closer to finding out who painted it?
No, but we are working on it, so I hope to find out very soon. But at this precise moment, I cannot give you a name, I'm afraid.
Okay. That's a difficult one.
It certainly is.
Our Provenance trail hasn't got us any further in establishing who painted the Port Glasgow picture. But now we know Isabella Hutchison most likely donated it to the church.
Back at the Kelvin Centre, it's the moment we've been waiting for. Ian Tyers has sequenced the tree rings, and we have a result. It's a huge piece of information Marjorie's late husband Ian longed to know. I've asked Marjorie to join me. We're about to find out whether we can date the Port Glasgow picture.
So, Marjorie, I know one of the things that Ian was interested in and wanted to do was apply technology to coming up with answers for this picture.
Yes, indeed. If he didn't have that facility, obviously, in the early 90s, and he wasn't involved with any lab or anything like that.
To be fair, in the 90s, the technology we're talking about wasn't as sophisticated as it is now, and dendrochronology has come on leaps and bounds. So, Ian, what have you found?
The last ring in the panel is 1574.
Oh, goodness.
How specific can you be on that?
So that means these trees are still growing in 1574, and therefore the panel must be after 1574.
That is truly amazing.
So now we know the date the tree was most likely felled and the earliest possible year the panel could have been made.
And mostly panels are used, what, within 10 years?
Yes, the general understanding we have is that they are used fresh and very quickly.
Do you think Ian would have found that useful?
Oh, definitely. To get such precision would have absolutely amazed him. He'd be delighted, absolutely delighted.
This is the most revealing clue in our investigation yet. The date of the panel means that the Port Glasgow picture could not have been painted before 1574, ruling out Franz Floris, who died in 1570. There's only one potential master left in our ecclesiastical whodunit, and what a name he was, Michiel Coxey, known as the Flemish Raphael. To get to know the artist better, we're on our way to Coxey's homeland of Belgium, to see one of Europe's most famous artworks in St. Bavo's Cathedral in Ghent.
Wow.
Spectacular, isn't it?
It really is awe-inspiring.
We've come to see a masterpiece Michiel Coxey knew well.
This mystical painting has emerged after 10 years of restoration.
Just magnificent, isn't it?
The Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, also known as the Ghent altarpiece, was created by brothers Hubert and Jan van Eyck 600 years ago. During its long life, it has been much copied and coveted as an object of desire.
And it's had quite a life. It's been stolen more than once, hasn't it?
Stolen by Napoleon, by the Nazis, it nearly burnt. It was recovered by the Americans after the war when it was found in a salt mine. I mean, this is a painting with form. But what I want you to have a look at is this.
Right.
What do you make of it?
Well, I presume this is that, isn't it?
Not quite. This painting was so admired and desired that people wanted their own Ghent altarpiece. So 100 years after it was painted, Philip II of Spain commissioned this copy. And the artist was Coxey.
Oh, right.
The artist who we have in our sights as the painter of our work.
The commission to copy this masterpiece for the king was one of Coxey's most prestigious, but he was far more than a mere copyist. Famous in his own lifetime, Coxey was hailed as one of the great artists of the Low Countries, and his influence on religious art was profound. His altarpieces were greatly admired, and in Brussels, the Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage have given us a rare opportunity to compare one by Coxey with the Port Glasgow picture. conservators here restored the Ghent altarpiece, and Helen Dubois and Nathalie Lacaire have offered to tell me more about this authentic work. Can we find any similarities between this and the Port Glasgow picture that might prove they are by the same artist?
Hello, Helen. Hello, Natalie.
Hello. Hello.
Thank you so much for giving us the time to show us this magnificent picture. So, what can you tell us about its history?
Well, this painting is a triptych painted by Michiel Coxey. It was painted for the Church of the Sablon, which is in the center of Brussels.
I mean, can you, at first glance, see any similarities?
The colors are quite striking, and there's some similarities. You have this kind of ochre tone, purplish tones, which we call also these colors we call changeants, which are different tones combined with each other.
Can you see any other comparisons?
Well, you can see in both cases that the faces, the postures go back to more Italian examples. You can see these painters are both inspired by Raphael. Also, there's clearly a reference to Roman or Greek ancient sculptures.
It's like the static coming to life in a funny sort of way.
Yes, very much. It's very dynamic composition, full of emotion. You see movements, people falling backwards. There's a lot of action in here. Your picture is full of emotion, very intense as well.
Yes.
In this period, you can see that Flemish artists have not quite understood really the Italian of the Renaissance sense of composition. The action is there, but it's fixed in time. It's just not really quite flowing as it does in Italian paintings.
Stylistic similarities between the two are promising. But we have seen evidence that the artist who created the Port Glasgow picture changed things as they went along. Is there anything similar in the Coxey painting?
So, Natalie, have you found any similar changes of mind in the painting you've now got to know so well?
Yeah, there are a lot of changes. Look at his foot here, for example. He changed his mind and replaced the composition.
Almost as if he's trying to sort of rebalance the figure.
That's a proof of the creation process of the painter.
Well, I mean, something very similar has happened in our picture of John. I mean, it's not a foot, it's a face. So both these painters, Coxey and the one who did ours, are searching. They're never quite satisfied.
The similarities between this known work by Michiel Coxey and the Port Glasgow picture are compelling. But these works have something else in common. Both were painted in the aftermath of one of the most devastating periods in Western art history. From the 1520s, the Reformation swept through Europe. In this religious revolution, Protestants rebelled against what they believed was a corrupt Catholic Church. The result was a series of violent attacks on places of worship. Countless religious paintings and statues were destroyed in what's known as the Great Iconoclasm. But in the decades that followed, there was a Catholic revival, and with it a huge demand to redecorate empty churches with new religious art to replace what had been lost. Artists like Michiel Coxey were back in business. Oliver Kick is an expert in this fascinating period of art history. Can he find any clues that could support the theory that Coxey painted the Port Glasgow picture?
This is coming straight after a period of religious turmoil with the iconoclasm. There was huge destruction of altarpieces and works of art in churches.
Leaving lots of empty spaces.
But leaving also lots of opportunities for the Catholic painters who came afterwards. So they had lots of commissions coming in to replace all these destroyed altarpieces.
I mean, presumably, it was a great time to be a painter.
Yes, these painters were working at breakneck speed to produce huge quantities of art, to refurnish those churches.
Where would these ideas for the composition have come from then, do you think?
What they would often refer to is, first of all, antique sculpture or classical sculpture, and then they would also use sources such as workshop drawings and then prints. They took certain sources and recombined them. One print, for example, would be a print after Tintoretto, where we see that he uses exactly the same foreshortening of the head of Christ.
There might have been a sort of scrapbook of images from the past, lots of ideas, and then a group of people under the work of a master putting paintings like this together.
Exactly.
It was also an opportunity for artists to look back at previous generations, and Oliver can see similarities between the Port Glasgow picture and this much earlier altarpiece by a master called Bernard van Orley.
One striking comparison is also to be made with a lamentation painted by the painter Bernard van Orley, who was working mostly in the 1520s, 1530s.
Okay, so you're painting a really interesting picture here in response to need, after all the destruction, workshops, plundering the past with images and other inspirations, putting together art.
This is really tantalising. To me, it's clear that whoever painted the Port Glasgow picture was inspired by this painting by Bernard van Orley.
Back in London, we're getting together with Marjorie to share our latest discoveries.
Well, Margaret, you've been very patient with us while we've been looking through Ian's list of suspects. And of course, this is what we're talking about, the Port Glasgow painting. Take a look at this. Now, this is a triptych by an artist called Bernard van Orley. It's in a church in Bruges. A triptych, of course, is a painting in 3 parts forming an altarpiece or a reredos, like the Port Glasgow picture.
Yes, of course.
Marjorie, I want you to cast your eyes to the bottom right.
Ah, yes, a lamentation.
A lamentation of Christ. But look even closer in comparison to the Port Glasgow picture.
Oh, my goodness, yes. Very similar pose, slightly different composition.
Well, the more time you spend analysing it, the more, I think, you come up with similarities. And if you look at the way that the figure of Christ is sitting, lying,
Yes.
it's almost a mirror image. And also notice the attitude of the head and the foreshortening.
So the question is, did Bernard van Orley, who painted this, paint the Port Glasgow picture?
Yes.
No, because Bernard van Orley died in 1541. And we know that this was painted after 1574.
Ah, yes, thanks to the dendrochronology.
Exactly. But this is where it gets exciting, because Bernard van Orley, and here he is, was a master artist with his own workshop full of apprentices and pupils. And one of them was Michiel Coxey.
My goodness, he looks like quite a guy. So he would have seen the work by Bernard van Orley.
Well, of course, because, I mean, at the risk of stating the obvious, this is before the days of internet and catalogue raisonné. And for Michiel to be familiar with this painting, he would almost certainly have had to come into some sort of physical presence with it. And it strikes me that the coincidence is too great to ignore.
It's not hard and fast evidence, but it's certainly compelling. And we'll just have to see if the experts agree.
Yes, let's hope that they do.
Thanks to this early 16th century work by his former master, we've narrowed our search down to one suspect, the Flemish Raphael, Michiel Coxey. But have we done enough to convince the experts? Back in Antwerp, I've come to a renowned centre for art historical research, the Rubenianum, where I've arranged to meet the leading expert on Coxey, Professor Koenraad Jonkeren. Hi there.
Hi, nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
His opinion will be decisive. Koen has agreed to share his initial thoughts before he considers our evidence. Does he buy our theory that the Port Glasgow painter was inspired by Bernard van Orley?
One thing that struck me is the similarity of this Christ figure to the very unusual figure in the Bernard van Orley painting, 50 or so years earlier. Is it possible that whoever came up with the idea for this picture was connected to or familiar with van Orley in some way?
Yeah, I think so. I think certainly you see ideas from Bernard van Orley literally sampled in this panel. The whole composition is being traced. You see some minor changes in some figures, like the St. John, but hardly.
And the fact that Christ has his knees up in this position, was that unusual?
Well, it's something that you don't see that often in 16th century painting. It was introduced by Van Orly. And so there's this direct line between the painter who painted your panel and this early 16th century important master. It is a piece of what must have been an enormous altarpiece. It was cut down.
Oh, right, I see. You think this is just a part of the original
work? I think
work?
so, because the figures are not fully on it, which is very exceptional. So it must have been cut down. And it was made at the end of the 16th century, on the eve of Baroque. That's the period when they start to experiment and sample everything that had been tried out in the 16th century, and that people like Rubens were eventually able to build their career on. And so this is, I think, a quite exceptional example of such a late 16th century panel.
While Kuhn retires to consider our evidence, back in London, we're taking stock.
I think we've built as strong a case as we can for this painting, particularly given the complexity of this period of art history. Imaging technology has shown us pentimenti, some significant alterations, the sign that a masterful, creative hand is at work. Dendrochronology, tree ring analysis, has established that the Port Glasgow picture could not have been painted before 1574. And this brings into focus an artist, Michiel Coxey, whose stylistic traits we've seen in Belgium. Also, the painting seems inspired by Coxey's master, Bernard van Orly.
This investigation has certainly had its challenges. The way the artist workshop operated in the 16th century with its many assistants, apprentices, journeymen, it was doubtful, certainly at the beginning, whether we'd ever be able to name a potential master. The provenance was initially promising. We managed to establish that a wealthy benefactor, Isabella Hutchison, paid for the church's altar and its furnishings, which we assume included the painting. That's where the trail went cold. With the help of many experts, both here and in Belgium, we've managed to work our way through Ian's list of suspects. And all the evidence seems to point to one name, Michiel Coxey, court painter to Philip II of Spain. After several weeks, we have a decision. Kuhn has consulted with his colleagues, and Dr. Tycho Seifert from the National Galleries of Scotland is joining us to deliver their verdict. Have we done enough to prove that the Port Glasgow picture is a lost masterpiece by Michiel Coxey? Marjorie is joining us at the gallery to hear the verdict.
Hi, Marjorie.
Hello.
Good to see you, Marjorie.
Good to be here.
So this is the day. Are you looking forward to it?
Oh, it's so exciting. Dying to know about it.
In terms of valuation, if we can give it the name that we've been trying to, Michiel Coxey, then we could be talking in terms of about £100,000.
Oh, gosh.
It's an impressive picture.
Yes, Ian would certainly agree with you on that.
What do you think Ian would say if he was here now?
He would be delighted that so much interest had been expressed in it. It's lovely to be doing this in memory of him.
Well, we've given it our best shot.
Tycho has joined us, and we're about to find out if we can put the name Michiel Coxey to the Port Glasgow picture.
So you've reached a decision.
Yes.
Are you ready to hear it, Marjorie?
Yes, as ready as I'll ever be.
I've discussed the research with Kuhn in Belgium, and Kuhn's opinion is, and I agree with him, that this painting is not by Michiel Coxey.
Oh, that's a shame.
I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
What makes you think it's not by Michiel Coxey?
Well, Kuhn's feeling was that the way it is painted is not as refined as we would expect him in his prime. And I think the style it is painted feels a tad later and not Michiel Coxey. However, there is also good news. Kuhn feels very strongly that the painter of this picture here must have had intimate knowledge of Michiel Coxey's workshop and the way he worked. And it must be a painter that towards the end of Michiel's life was in the circle of the artist. And the prime candidate would be his son, Raphael.
Was he a significant artist in his own right, or just another person in the workshop?
He was the oldest son of Michiel Coxey, and he worked with him. He collaborated with him, so they sometimes even worked on the same picture. We know that. Raphael would have had this intimate knowledge, which we feel was necessary to paint this.
I feel really positive about what you just said. I mean, we had that whole thicket of possibilities, did we not? And we've managed to narrow it down to a likely name and place and date.
I think you've done a brilliant job, frankly. At this point in art history, with the structure of workshops and everything, to find an artist who was responsible from start to finish, this is the exception rather than the rule. So to narrow it down in the way we've been able to, I think is actually a success.
So where do you think this leaves us then, Philip, in terms of how we put a value on this picture?
It's such an opaque period of art history that even just to give it as closely as you have to these key figures, I think still makes it a very desirable painting. I can see museums being interested, I can see collectors being interested. In terms of valuation, not probably £100,000, probably £60,000, £70,000.
Oh my goodness. I'm sure the bishop will be interested to hear that.
I'm sure he will. Ian MacDonald started investigating the Port Glasgow picture 30 years ago. Thanks to the clues he left us, we can now say it was painted by someone in Michiel Coxey's circle. Most likely Coxey's son, Raphael, named after the Italian painter Coxey admired so much.
Ian would be very impressed with all the research that's been done. It certainly proved that it was late 16th century Flemish, which is what he thought, that it was an important work, which has also been agreed. Yeah, he would be very satisfied with that. But he would have relished the discussion. And that's, I think, what is missing. On the whole, that would have been his great joy.
Now we've finished the work Ian began, the painting will return home to St. John the Baptist Church in Port Glasgow, where it will go back on the wall for parishioners to enjoy.
At 42 million.
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
So, thank you very much.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
My God, there's a lot at stake with this one.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye. I don't believe it.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue.
It's like a challenge. Who am I?
But not every painting is quite what it seems.
Just the sort of thing you might associate with a faked painting.
It's a journey that can end in joy.
It is indeed by John Constable.
Oh, brilliant.
Wonderful.
Or bitter disappointment.
The work is not by Henry Moore. So sorry.
In this episode, could a work painted on the wall of a Surrey cottage be by one of the pioneers of abstract art, Ben Nicholson?
It's the first time we've considered a picture with a house attached.
We journey to the far corners of the country in search of this master of British modernism.
They just look so cool, don't they? You just like to hang out with them.
We're on a quest to try and save this potential masterpiece in peril.
If this is by Ben Nicholson, you're going to lose your bedroom wall.
I know.
And you're happy for that?
No. But there's another artist in the frame. We've got to consider the possibility.
He's done it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you worrying now?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah. This week's case brings us to leafy Surrey. We're heading to a pretty hamlet near Guildford. We've been contacted by a couple who'd like our help to investigate a rather unusual work of art.
Hello. Hi.
Hi there.
Ian and Julie Harrington live at Redstream Cottage. When they moved in nearly 20 years ago, they discovered something quite unexpected in the spare bedroom.
Well, this is it.
A curious wall painting.
Well, it's a rather startling composition, a sort of fusion of geometric shapes, circles and squares with patterns, and, well, the word or name Bach running through it.
So this is painted, what, directly on the plaster?
It is, yeah.
It's so unexpected to find it here in this room, but I really like it. I think it's really interesting. And who do you think the artist might be?
We've been told Ben Nicholson.
Well, that would make sense. I mean, as an abstract painter, that's just the sort of thing he might have come up with.
Ben Nicholson was one of the greatest British artists of the 20th century. Born in 1894, he rose to become a key figure in the European avant-garde. He was a pioneer of modernism and rejected conventional ways of painting, experimenting with bold, new means of expression. In a career spanning more than 6 decades, his abstract works were among the most influential in British art. Today, Nicholson is highly prized.
Lot number 3 is the beautiful Nicholson white relief at £1,500,000. The Nicholson's yours, sir.
Could this wall painting be by one of the leading lights of British modern art?
So how did you come across it?
When we first brought the house, basically I was ripping into the house, ripping everything out, giving it a whitewash. It was protected by just a basic frame and a piece of perspex, and it's behind a bunk bed. Didn't really think it was all that. So it was going to get emulsioned straight over.
But the room was bright blue and yellow, and it was not nice colours. So, and then you had that there with the perspex, so it was all really quite busy.
It could have been painted white, that's what I was going to do. Or our daughter was only 4 at the time, could have even coloured it in.
What with
she was
crayons
going to,
or
yeah, she
Yeah.
would have finished it off.
Dot to dot.
God forbid.
Dot to dot.
Yeah. But you just don't expect it to be in a bedroom, do you?
Well, that sounds like a close shave. So what actually stopped you painting over it?
A neighbour, Derek, down the road, come down and introduce himself. We'd been here a couple of days, and he was told by the lady that used to live here, this Ben Nicholson chap had stayed and had done a painting on the wall.
And so who were the people who lived here then before?
That's the Murrays, Frederick States Murray and his wife, Madge.
So the Mr. and Mrs. Murray who lived here, they're no longer around?
No.
So it all hangs on Derek telling you what he saw and what they told him?
Yeah, and this was like 19 years ago, 20 years ago nearly.
And have you had anyone round before us to try and establish if it is by Ben Nicholson?
There has been a couple of auction houses, but no one's prepared to stick their neck out and say 100%.
Ian and Julie want help to get to the bottom of the mystery because they're concerned some home improvements might damage the work.
We're currently building an extension right on that corner, so you can probably see that it's not that stable.
No, look, it looks vulnerable.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not on panel or canvas. This is plaster on a wall. Building works around, this is potentially in peril.
To protect the work, they've explored having it removed by specialist conservators.
They can do it. The prices we've had, £10,000, £15,000 to have it removed.
Wow.
Which is a lot when you don't know whether it is genuine.
Yeah, well, removing a painting like this from a wall is a really risky and, of course, it's an expensive process. But frankly, if you don't remove it, It's in danger here, and if you want to sell it, then it's going to have to go.
And is that what you'd like to do? If it is by Ben Nicholson, would you like to sell it?
I think we would.
As long as, obviously, the cost is covered to remove it.
Right. So if this is by Ben Nicholson then, Philip, what would it be worth?
Well, if we can conclusively prove that this is a work by Ben Nicholson, and Ben Nicholson is a name to conjure with, I could see it being worth up to £200,000.
Wow.
No way.
You wanted to paint over it.
I know, I did.
I had no idea it was that. That would be just unbelievable.
But that is only if we can safely get it off the wall, but that whole process is fraught with risk.
Yeah, I guess it would be. Yeah, it's going to be quite a challenge, I think.
Well, it's the first time we've ever considered a picture on Fake or Fortune with a house attached.
That's a different way of putting it.
Ian is a builder, and he's been spending his weekends working on an extension to Redstream Cottage. As work progresses, he's becoming increasingly concerned about the fate of the wall painting. It feels like a now or never moment for the work of art he's lived with for so long.
Well, I can see it's all going on out here, isn't it?
It is now, yeah. It's starting to take shape.
So talk me through the plan.
Basically, we'd be taking that blockwork right up to the roof level. It'd be 2 stories coming out, and the painting is right behind those tiles there, to the left-hand side of that window. So as we start building this up and taking that wall out, all sorts of problems could be happening.
So there's going to be a lot of banging and crashing.
It will be.
And vibrations against that wall.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Oh, so it's all on hold at the moment, is it? That last bit, until we work out whether this is a Ben Nicholson or not?
Whether it's worth saving.
Right, so no pressure then. OK, well, we'll do our best, and then one way or the other, you'll be able to finish your house.
Brilliant, yeah, that'd be great.
I'm kicking off the investigation by taking a closer look at the physical evidence, the painting itself.
We're looking at a classic example of abstract art, which actually is just as well, because our hoped-for artist, Ben Nicholson, was famed for it. Nicholson said that abstract art was freedom of form and colour. There's a whole sort of stack of geometric shapes, circles, squares, angles. I mean, it's really complex. And what sort of holds it together are the colours. Primary, strong, almost clashing. I mean, it feels to me slightly unsettling, dissonant. But there's something else going on in this picture, introducing a sense of harmony. In fact, music, this treble clef. Now, follow the line through the middle into this large yellow orb, and then it seems to radiate around it. And then suddenly, hey presto, it turns into what looks like a stringed instrument. And then running through the painting like a sort of signpost, B-A-C-H, Bach. This almost feels like a painting not just to be seen, but also to be heard. So is it then by the great modernist master, Ben Nicholson? Or is it someone who's doing a homage to the artist, who's doing something in his style?
It was thanks to a neighbour that Ian and Julie didn't just emulsion over the wall painting when they moved in. I'm heading a few doors along the road to meet long-standing resident Derek Metcalfe.
Hello, Fiona. Come on in.
Thank you very much.
Derek was friends with the former owner of Redstream Cottage, Mrs. Madge Murray. She told him all about the mysterious wall painting in the bedroom.
One day she said, I've got an interesting painting upstairs. Come up and have a look at it. So I trooped upstairs into that bedroom, and she said, this is where Ben Nicholson always used to sleep, in this room. And she said that painting pointing to the on the wall was what he did whilst he was here in bed. And she said, I realised the importance of it. So she went into Guildford and organised a sheet of perspex and had it fixed over the wall so that it would never be painted over. And subsequent owners of the house, I always made sure I stressed this point, that that was an original by Ben Nicholson, and it was extremely valuable.
So that painting has survived, what, 30 years or so?
Yes.
Thanks to you.
Yeah. Every time I went knocking on the door and telling them that, don't you dare paint that wall.
There seem to be some questions now about the authenticity of the painting on the wall. What do you make of that, given what Mrs. Murray told you?
I would think if Mrs. Murray said it was Ben Nicholson, you could bet your bottom dollar that was by Ben Nicholson. I mean, if she's up top listening now, she'd say, no, it was by Ben.
If only she could tell us herself.
Sadly, Derek's good word is not enough for the art world. We need to prove Ben Nicholson painted this wall painting. Can we establish how Nicholson might have known the former owners of Redstream Cottage, Fred and Madge State Murray? Our hunt for evidence has led us to Cambridge. This is Kettle's Yard. It was once home to art collectors Jim and Helen Eade, and still houses their remarkable collection of modern art. Jim Eade was a friend and patron of Ben Nicholson's. They met in the 1920s, when Nicholson was leader of a revolutionary group of artists called the 7 and 5 Society. The 7 and 5 broke all the rules and found radical new ways of expression. With Nicholson at the helm, the group heralded the birth of British modernism. I think that one of its members could provide a tantalising link between Nicholson and the owners of Redstream Cottage.
Over there is a work by Ben Nicholson, but next to it, see that rather intriguing pot behind those leaves? This is a work by a fellow member of the 7 and 5 Society, a potter called William State Murray. And crucially, William State Murray was the brother Fred State Murray.
You lived at Redstream Cottage, of course. So is it possible, then, that Fred Murray knew Ben Nicholson through his brother William?
This is what we've got to find out.
Kettle's Yard curator Eliza Spindle has been delving into the archives. I'm hoping she can shed light on this intriguing link to Ben Nicholson.
Eliza, I'm trying to establish a connection between William State Murray's brother Fred and Ben Nicholson, so I'm wondering if you can help.
Well, let's start with William State Murray. He was one of the leading ceramicists of his day and a key figure in London's avant-garde. And he saw pottery as an essential discipline in modern art, which was something that Ben Nicholson also advocated.
William State Murray joined the 7 and 5 Society in 1927. He and Ben Nicholson exhibited together at least a dozen times. Surely there was ample opportunity for Nicholson to meet William's brother, Fred.
Can we make any connection between Fred and Ben Nicholson?
Yeah, absolutely. If we have a look at the next folder, we've got some photos of Fred.
So this is Fred Murray, owner of Redstream Cottage, a face to a name. And also he was an artist?
Well, he wasn't an artist by trade. He was an engineer. But he was, by all accounts, very interested in art. As you can see, he was an amateur sculptor himself as well.
And a very good one by the looks of things.
Yeah, definitely. Here we have a letter from our archive written by Ben Nicholson to Jim Eade quite a few years later in 1948. And Ben Nicholson is writing about the early years in his career when he was struggling to make ends meet as an artist.
Dear Jim, your encouragement and Helen Sutherland's and Reddy Hoff's and Fred Murray's was about all one had, but it was quite enough, and that early help means a great deal to this day. Oh, now that's interesting. So Fred Murray was a supporter of Ben Nicholson in the early days, meaning he was a patron. He would have bought Ben Nicholson's paintings?
Yeah, absolutely. He was a very important early patron for Ben Nicholson.
Whoa. Well, that is a good start. So now we've got an absolute direct connection between Ben Nicholson and Fred Murray. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I'm on the hunt for stylistic evidence. I've come to the right place because Kettle's Yard holds one of the biggest collections of Ben Nicholson works in the country. During the 1920s, Nicholson favoured still lifes and landscapes, painted in a deliberately naive style. But during the 30s, he became increasingly inspired by Cubist artists like Picasso and Braque, as well as Modigliani, who experimented with geometric shapes and forms to create abstract compositions. I'm keen to see if these genuine Ben Nicholson works show any similarities with Ian and Julie's wall painting.
Wherever I look in this amazing place, I get a sense of the motifs, the ideas of Ben Nicholson that immediately suggest Ian and Julie's picture. Look at this painting. It's a still life, 1930, and it represents a cup, a jug, a plate. But look how he's played with the lines, the tones, the shadows. He's trying to give you an alternative viewpoint. But the best bit, do you see those wavy lines? Some attempt at introducing movement and flux into the painting. We've seen them before. It's an Ian and Julie's painting. And then a cluster of dots, very similar to the ones that we've seen and applied in a very comparable way with the end of a brush.
And other works here by Ben Nicholson use overlapping geometric shapes and vivid colours, just like Ian and Julie's painting.
All of these stylistic similarities are quite compelling.
Back in Surrey, Ian and Julie have called a halt to the building work to avoid putting a potential masterpiece in peril. I've invited wall paintings conservator Tom Organ to give us some urgent advice. If we can prove the wall painting is by Ben Nicholson, can it be removed and saved? The process of detaching wall paintings dates back millennia to Roman times, but in recent years the practice has hit the headlines. The huge popularity of the street artist Banksy has led to a number of his works being removed from buildings to be sold. This has caused controversy, with locals angry that Banksys have been lost for commercial gain. But if a wall painting is at risk of being destroyed, conservators agree that removing it is justifiable as a means of ensuring its survival. Tom is assessing the safest way to rescue Ian and Julie's wall painting.
So Tom, from where I'm standing, this looks like a pretty vulnerable picture.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of flaking, there's cracking across the surface, as you can see, and there are areas of plaster loss already on the right-hand side.
It looks really sad and tired, doesn't it?
It does.
It needs some love.
It does need a bit of love, absolutely.
Now there's going to be building works. What impact could that have?
Well, that's the big concern, that you have vibration and movement mean that you have an uncontrolled collapse and loss.
Oh, stop it, that sounds dreadful.
So how does Tom propose we save the wall painting?
The options are really to look at the removal process of the painting from the wall. I mean, there are three options, really. The first one is to remove the paint layer.
In this method, a facing material is applied to the surface of the work, then the paint layer is peeled off the plaster.
It's risky and it can, of course, cause damage. And you change the surface of the painting in doing it in those ways.
So let's not risk or consider that,
No,
I think, Julie,
not
don't
at all.
you?
OK.
So what would option 2 be?
So the second one is to take the paint layer with the plaster support.
What? So sorry, you mean take the plaster off the bricks?
Yeah.
Yikes.
This method involves cutting the paint layer and the plaster away from the brickwork, hopefully in one piece. But this may be too risky for Ian and Julie's wall painting.
You've got a relatively thin plaster layer on the brickwork.
Yeah.
And we know that the way the bricks are laid, they're uneven. And then you hit an obstacle halfway through. There's timber in there as well, so you could have a real issue halfway through the process.
It sounds frightening, very frightening.
So, Tom, let's hope there's an option 3.
Well, the option 3 is not to get it off the wall. It's to take the wall.
Take the wall?
Take the wall.
So the final option is to remove the wall painting with the wall attached.
The process preserves the mural as a mural, so you're left with stabilised paint layers, stable plaster, the brick support all together, and all the surface qualities of the painting are retained.
And given the peril that it's in now, you would recommend that as the best option?
I think it's something, yeah, that we have to look at seriously.
But Julie, if this does turn out to be by Ben Nicholson, you're going to lose your bedroom wall.
I know.
And you're happy for that?
No. Ian will have to put it back.
Well, at least you're married to a builder.
With such drastic, risky and expensive action needed to save the wall painting, we'd better be sure what we're dealing with. I need some expert help, so I'm heading to Norfolk. I've come to the seaside village of Haysborough. I'm here to meet one of the world's leading Ben Nicholson scholars, Dr. Lee Beard. Lee is one of the experts who'll judge the wall painting, so I'm keen to get his insights. We've arranged to meet at Church Farmhouse so he can tell me about a crucial period in Nicholson's career, one I hope might help us better understand Ian and Julie's wall painting. So Lee, explain to me the significance of this place.
Okay, well, this is a place that Ben Nicholson came on holiday in September 1931. He was invited by a group of artists, including Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth.
The world-renowned sculptors.
Exactly. If you look in here, there's a letter actually sent from Barbara Hepworth to Ben Nicholson, inviting Ben to join the party.
Dear Ben, do come and stay with us in Haysborough. I enclose a photo of the farm. The country is quite flat, but for a little hill with a tall flint church and lighthouse. The beach is a ribbon of pale sand as far as the eye can see. The Moors and ourselves should be so pleased if you came.
Nicholson took up the offer and joined the group. His wife, the artist Winifred Nicholson, stayed at home with their young children. An evocative photo captures these bright young things of modern art. Henry Moore stands next to Barbara Hepworth, and seated beside, Ben Nicholson.
So this was esteemed company,
Exactly.
artistic company that he was joining.
Yeah, some of the biggest names of British modernism. Quite early on in their careers, I mean, all of them were starting to make a name for themselves in London as artists.
They just look so cool, don't they? Especially Barbara Hepworth, you know, with their arms up. You just like to have hung out with them, don't you think, when you look at a picture like that?
Yeah, it does look fun.
This was a life-changing moment for Ben Nicholson, both creatively and personally. It was here that the 37-year-old artist began a relationship with Barbara Hepworth, who was 28. Soon after, both ended their marriages, and Nicholson moved to Hampstead in London to share a studio with Hepworth. They became the centre of a circle of artists known as the Hampstead Modernists.
And how pivotal a moment was this then in Ben Nicholson's development as an artist?
Oh, it was extremely important. I think there was a sense of confidence for both artists in moving forward, moving towards abstraction, a complete abstraction in their work. They exhibited their works together, they had joint exhibitions, and were keen to promote the modernism that they were developing.
We've established that during the 1930s, Nicholson's style becomes increasingly abstract. Does this help determine when the wall painting might fit into his career?
So when it comes to Ian and Julie's picture, you haven't seen it yet, Lee, but you are actually one of the specialists who will be authenticating it or not, as the case may be. If it is by Ben Nicholson, given what you said about this period, would you place it before all this, before 1931, or afterwards?
If it is by Ben Nicholson, I would say it's possibly contemporary with, or certainly after this period. The more abstract forms, the red squiggly lines and the dots, and certainly the intersecting and overlapping abstract shapes do make sense for Ben Nicholson's work, both from this period and slightly later.
And, I mean, we've got a lot of work to do on this yet before we finally make our case to you, but are there any issues you can see with it?
The drawing of that musical instrument seems slightly hesitant. The way that the neck tilts backwards does not seem right with Ben Nicholson's way of drawing. I think the same applies perhaps to the musical notes and perhaps the lettering as well.
Ian and Julie's neighbour says that Madge Murray told him unequivocally that Ben Nicholson painted this. Does that sway you at all?
It's not out of the question that it could have been painted or drawn by someone else.
What, like Fred Murray, for example?
Possibly.
Right. What evidence would help make the case for this?
I think the most important thing is really to locate Ben Nicholson in Redstream Cottage. Obviously, that would help the provenance a great deal.
Back at the gallery, we're getting to grips with the evidence so far.
So here we have Ben Nicholson, looking every inch the avant-garde artist, I have to say, and Fred Murray, early patron of Ben Nicholson.
So, the good news is we now have a connection between the owner of Redstream Cottage, Fred Murray, and our hoped-for artist.
Yes, but the not-so-good news is that one of the experts I was talking to, Lee Beard, is concerned that possibly Fred Murray could have done this painting. And in particular, he didn't like the way the musical instrument was depicted.
But I've been thinking about that. You know, stringed instruments abound throughout Nicholson's work. He was influenced by the major Cubist artists in France, Georges Braque, Pablo Picasso, even went to visit their studios. That's where this idea came from. That's why we're seeing it, I think.
Okay, so this is encouraging then. So the fact that there is an instrument is something that is typical of Nicholson?
Yes. And I've shown Ian and Julie's picture to a musical expert who helped me identify the instrument. It's a mandolin, albeit with a bit of artistic license. It seems to have the head of a lute. But look, a mandolin in the background of Hepworth and Nicholson's studio. And here's another one.
That's brilliant, isn't it?
And look at this painting.
And I wonder if that's the same one, look, with the squiggly lines there.
Could be.
The only thing is, when it comes to the mandolin specifically, Lee Beard had problems with the way it was drawn. He thinks it's too realistic for Ben Nicholson.
Yeah. If you look at a classic Nicholson, it's abstracted. He's played with the shapes and colours. Compare it to Ian and Julie's, very naturalistic.
There is one thing that Lee says would help us, is if we can place Ben Nicholson in Redstream Cottage. That would really help our case.
So we need to get Nicholson in the right place at the right time.
We need hard evidence that Ben Nicholson stayed in Redstream Cottage, so I've arranged to meet Ian at the Tate Gallery. The archives here hold a vast collection of material relating to the artist. Among it all is a stash of letters between Nicholson and his patron, Fred Murray. We've got one letter here from Fred to Ben Nicholson. It's December 16th, 1930. What are you doing? Working hard, I expect. And when are you coming south? I should like to see you again and talk paintings and perhaps another round of golf. So they met, they were friends, they talked about paintings, they played golf together.
Good friends, obviously, yeah.
Yeah. But there's one snag with this.
Different address. Oldfield Cottage, Liskeard Gardens, Blackheath. It's not our property then.
So, in 1930, Fred and Madge Murray are not living at Redstream Cottage. They're over 60 miles away in Blackheath in London. We're now in 1933, and Barbara Hepworth writes to Fred. Dear Fred, we did so enjoy seeing you the other day. I did mean to write to you at once to tell you how happy I was about you having that carving. I would rather you had it than anybody, I mean that. With love to you both, Barbara, and from Ben, it says here.
Very personal.
It is, it shows they were really close.
Yeah.
So this is a letter to Fred. So where was he living at the time? We've got the envelope addressed to...
Blackheath again.
Yeah. Frustratingly, Ben and Fred's many letters to each other during the 1930s all share the same problem.
Blackheath.
So look, what have we got? We've got Fred and Ben and Barbara Hepworth having a very close relationship, being good friends, the kind of friends where they might have stayed in each other's houses.
Okay.
But we haven't got Ben Nicholson staying at Redstream Cottage where you are.
Yep.
Another document and an intriguing photograph reveals new information about Fred Murray. We already know he was an amateur sculptor, but there's something else which raises alarm bells. Fred Murray was himself a keen painter and sculptor.
Okay. I didn't realise he was a painter as well. So, yeah.
And look at him in the picture.
Yeah.
in his painter's smock. So we've got to consider the possibility.
He's done it.
Yeah. Did he do the painting that's on your wall?
Okay.
Are you worrying now?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you
But
might
anyway,
be right.
we'll see.
You might be right too.
While Ian and Fiona continue to search the archives, I've put in a call to the Courtauld Institute. I'm hoping science might help us discover whether Ben Nicholson painted the wall painting or not. So I've enlisted the help of Professor Aviva Bernstock. Aviva is one of the world's leading authorities in the scientific study of art. I've invited her to Redstream Cottage to examine the wall painting forensically. She's taking microscopic samples which could help reveal how the work was painted and with what materials. I'm hoping Aviva's research might take us closer to Ben Nicholson.
There's the painting that you can see, and then there's the painting that's almost invisible to the naked eye, that only technology can find. But there's one thing of which we are absolutely certain about this painting. It was done so in this room, where Aviva is standing. What a thought is that? The question is, will what Aviva is finding bring us closer to the identity of this person? Is it Ben Nicholson or not?
Our research so far has revealed that during the 1930s, Fred and Madge Murray aren't even living at Redstream Cottage, so Ben Nicholson couldn't have painted the wall painting then. Back at the Tate, I think I've made a breakthrough.
So we're now in the war years, and there's a big gap in their correspondence, perhaps not surprisingly. And we don't hear again, as far as we can tell, until 1945. And this is from Ben to Fred Murray, and I just want to point out the address.
Redstream Cottage, Berkeley Green, Bramley, near Guildford. That's mine.
Bingo. What we need to do now is place Ben in Redstream Cottage.
Stay in there.
If he's physically going to have painted that on the wall, he needs to have been there.
Needs to have stayed there, yeah.
So, got a letter here, and this is from Ben to Barbara Hepworth.
Right.
And he says here, I go to Fred Murray's Saturday the 10th afternoon till Monday morning.
Okay.
So this is his intention to go.
Right.
Did he actually get there?
Okay.
It's a bit tense, isn't it?
Yeah, just a bit. Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Keep reading.
Here we go. This is a letter that Ben wrote to Fred a couple of weeks later, 1947. And he says, I shan't forget the long weekend with you and Madge for a long time.
At the cottage.
This is him thanking him for being at Redstream Cottage.
So he has been there?
Yeah.
To the spare room?
To the spare room, yes, indeed.
Brilliant. You're doing well. You're doing really well here. That's better again now.
Well, listen, I aim to please.
Finally, in the handwriting of the artist himself is the evidence we've been searching for.
So what we've got here is absolute proof that Ben Nicholson and Fred and Madge were good friends. And such good friends that not only did they buy paintings from him, but he stayed at Redstream Cottage.
He has, yeah. Brilliant. There's been lots of ups and downs, so this is, we're moving upwards again.
It's the right direction of travel, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Excellent.
Back at the gallery, I'm updating Philip.
So we have now crossed one of the biggest hurdles in this investigation. We have documentary proof that Ben Nicholson stayed at Redstream Cottage.
And straight from the horse's mouth.
I thought I had photographic proof as well. This is a letter that Ben Nicholson writes to Madge Murray after he stayed at Redstream Cottage, and he's thanking her for some photographs she took of them while he was staying there. And he says, rather nice that one of those blokes leaning on the gate at Redstream Cottage. Doesn't Freddie look benign? I think the other two of Ben Nicholson, are lousy. Please destroy them. And then he says, except for the bit in close. And look, we've just got a little fragment of a photograph here. He must have cut himself out, and all he's left is Fred and Madge's Scotty dog.
How frustrating. Cute dog, though.
So close. But this is all we've got.
So if this work is by Ben Nicholson, it has to be painted in 1947, when he was at Redstream Cottage. Not long afterwards, he painted 2 murals, and they're worth looking at. This is for an ocean-going liner called the Rangitani, and it dates to 1949. And this one was painted for the Festival of Britain in 1951, another mural. Just compare the composition to Ian and Julie's picture, and you've got really distinct similarities, the same geometric interlocking shapes.
Definitely, they both seem to be speaking the same language, don't they? But we've still got to address the point that one of the experts has real concerns that Fred Murray could have painted this picture.
Yeah, it's a really good point. If we're going to progress this, we've got to firmly rule Fred Murray out of the picture.
I need to find out more about Fred Murray, not just as a collector, but as an artist. So I'm heading back to Surrey. Fred and Madge had no children, but we've managed to track down their extended family. Madge's great-nephews Tom and Peter Saunders and Peter's wife Zena have agreed to meet me.
Hi there, nice to see you. Nice to see you too.
I'm hoping they can shed some light on Ian and Julie's wall painting, especially as it turns out they were frequent visitors to Redstream Cottage.
That's us in 1963, I think, with Uncle Fred. That's me on the left, and it's Peter in the stream.
This is immediately opposite Redstream Cottage in a garden that they owned.
Tell me about Madge, what was she like?
She was just a very, very special aunt. We were always very warmly welcomed, and she made a great fuss of us.
And what about Fred? What was he like?
Very warm and a tremendous sense of fun. I remember the laughter. Yeah, lovely man.
They sound like a great couple.
Yeah.
Fred and Madge were married in 1927. Madge shared Fred's love of art. She had a loom and made textiles. Madge's family had been searching through her papers for any information about Ben Nicholson's stay at Redstream Cottage.
So this is an envelope in Madge's handwriting.
2 negatives. Ben Nicholson at Redstream Cottage weekend. Ben Nicholson at Redstream Cottage.
The negatives are difficult to see clearly, but helpfully Tom has had some prints made.
This is at Redstream Cottage, isn't it?
That's the studio behind Redstream Cottage, yes.
So here's Ben Nicholson with a painting of his, one assumes?
That is right, and Fred owned that one. That's Ben Nicholson sitting on the step of the studio in the garden at Redstream Cottage, along with the Scotty dog.
I recognise that dog.
This is the photo Ben Nicholson cut himself out of because he said he looked lousy. Now we can see the bigger picture, with the artist in tow.
So here we've got the photographs of Ben Nicholson staying at the cottage. Let me show you the painting that we're looking at. Do you remember any conversations about who might have done this painting?
Not specifically. Not specifically. It was part of an environment of endlessly fascinating art objects.
Did anyone ever mention this painting being by Ben Nicholson?
Well, yes, to me. When I was popping in for afternoon tea, Madge said, well, look, I'll show you around. And we totted up these tiny little stairs, almost like a ladder. And in here, showing me into one room, is a painting by Ben Nicholson. And...
Hang on, hang on. So Madge took you into that room, showed you this picture, and said to you directly, this is a painting by Ben Nicholson.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. I mean, I cannot overstate quite how exciting a revelation this is. Sadly, you know, if you were in court, it would be hearsay.
Yes, exactly. It's not enough, is it, for you?
It's not. I mean, it's really close, but it isn't enough. And there are still question marks over that painting on the wall. It hasn't been accepted as a Ben Nicholson.
With a leading expert questioning whether Fred Murray did the wall painting, I still need to see what Fred's art looks like.
So what I'm going to look for then is there anything in here that seems similar to the painting on the wall?
Mm-hmm.
Other than the fact that it's abstract, I can't really see any similarities there. Oh, now this does look a bit more similar. It certainly reminds me of the word Bach written in the wall painting. I mean, looking at these wavy red lines here, there's certainly some similarities there.
Compared to Ian and Julie's wall painting, there's no denying certain motifs in Fred's works are too close for comfort.
I mean, do you think it's possible that the painting is by Fred?
I think if it had been, we would never have heard the end of it at home.
What, because he'd have been proud of it?
Because he would have been proud of it, and because our dad would have been very proud of his uncle. And I'm quite sure that we would have heard that story.
Who do you think painted the wall painting?
Oh, very definitely Ben Nicholson.
I agree, Ben Nicholson.
Yes, I have no doubt it's Ben Nicholson.
Well, that is very strong testimony indeed. Let's hope it's enough to persuade the experts.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Back at Redstream Cottage, I'm giving Julie the good and the bad news.
Oh, wow!
So speaking to Madge's family, it is their belief, unequivocally, that the picture is by Ben Nicholson.
Goodness.
In the art world, it's called a traditional attribution, and it's always comforting. The fact that it's been known in the family as a work by Ben Nicholson.
But there's no denying Fred's artworks have brought a troubling twist to our investigation.
Quite similar to our painting on the wall, isn't it?
It's quite close. And this is the sort of thing that can put doubt into the minds of experts.
Mm-hmm. So it could go either way, really, couldn't it?
Yes.
Madge's family are adamant the wall painting is not by Fred Murray, but another theory has occurred to me. Could it be in part by him?
It would have implications if it's a collaborative work. In other words, Fred was working with Ben on this.
Right.
That would no longer make it a pure painting by Ben, and it could impact on the valuation quite substantially.
I'm not sure if I'm going to tell Ian that at tea time tonight, though. He is so passionate about it, so excited. It's like a child in a toy shop.
So our job now is to try and prove that this painting is 100% by Ben Nicholson.
Please do it for Ian.
Back in London, I'm heading to the Courtauld Institute. We need to determine whether the wall painting is the work of two hands or one, so I'm hoping Professor Aviva Bernstock can help. Aviva has been studying the samples she took from the painting. Like slices of cake, these cross-sections allow us to see the different paint layers, revealing how the work was constructed. I've asked Aviva to take us through every stage of this mysterious work of art.
So, Aviva, what have you managed to deduce?
Well, what was interesting is I took samples right down to the brick of the wall. So the first bottom layer that you see that looks brown is where I think I scraped the brick. So I think that's particles of brick. And then on top of that is a really thick layer of chalk and some sandy brownish material, which might be plaster. And then over that is that black layer of mould.
Nothing wrong with a good bit of mould.
So there are quite a few other layers on top of that, some chalk-containing layers and house paint.
So everything you've shown me is basically history of the bedroom.
Yes, absolutely.
There's no end to what you can discover, is there? I mean, how that bedroom was decorated in the past.
And on the very top, there is a priming layer, which I think was applied by the artist, which was much whiter than it appears now. It's absorbed quite a lot of dirt.
So the background of the wall painting was much whiter when it was painted, which would have made the composition even more striking. Now we've reached the painted surface, can Aviva ascertain the order in which the work was executed? This might get us closer to working out if Ian and Julie's wall painting is by one hand or two.
This is how I think it was painted. So first the large circle was drawn in with a compass, and after that the horizontal rectangle was put on with one corner in the centre of the circle. And then the square on its side with double edges.
This is utterly intriguing. So you're actually demonstrating here that the narrative, how each stage happened.
Yeah, I think from close looking we can work out how this composition was put together.
As the many stages of Ian and Julie's wall painting are revealed, I'm struck by the complexity of this composition. Whoever painted this is playing with space, working on multiple planes. Shapes are intertwined, lines overlap and disappear behind neighbouring forms. The musical motifs pierce and permeate different phases of the design. It feels like this is a virtuoso at work.
I would say that's absolutely brilliant. You've shown the process which we associate with Ben Nicholson. And that is just playing with planes and edges. But does it take us any further to being able to determine whether this is one hand or two?
Well, it seems to me that the same materials have been used at different stages of the composition, overlaying elements, working together, which I would have thought was done by one person. I think that's more likely.
So the complexity of the wall painting suggests there's only one artist at work. But can we nail that artist as Ben Nicholson? Back at the gallery, we've invited Ian and Julie for a final update.
So, here's the man at the centre of our mystery, Ben Nicholson. This isn't actually him painting the picture on your wall, sadly.
That would be amazing.
That would have been good. That's not our bedroom.
No, that isn't. But we have already proven, as you know, that Ben Nicholson stayed at your cottage, at Redstream Cottage, in May 1947.
But getting into the house is great and all fair and well, but we need to make that extra bit of connection between the painting on your wall and the artist.
So we've been taking a closer look at this inscription, Bach, which of course refers to the 18th century composer Johann Sebastian Bach. Now, digging in the Tate archives, we have a letter here, and this is written in June 19th, 1947, just a few weeks after he stayed at Redstream Cottage. He's written to a famous patron of his, Helen Sutherland, also she was a friend of his. He's written, "Dear Helen, I said I would write and tell you what records I got with your Christmas present." And he lists them, and look, three records by Bach.
Oh, wow.
He says, "I fell for Bach, which feels so close to my own idea of life."
So obviously he was really passionate about Bach.
Well, crucially, it's all around the time when he stayed at Redstream Cottage. And there's more. This is one of Ben Nicholson's notebooks, and look, here's 6 more Bach records. I mean, he was clearly obsessed with Bach.
Yeah.
And hopefully the passion that he was feeling for Bach come out in our painting.
Why not? I mean, he's knee-deep in the records. And this gives us that tangible piece of evidence, the connection. The word Bach now suddenly means something. And if your painting is by him, it's not ridiculous to suppose that he might have been listening to the music as he put the paint upon the wall.
That's a lovely thought, isn't it? Listening to the music.
Yeah, and who else would start thinking about introducing that into the painting?
It makes sense.
Let's hope it's him.
We've done all that we can. It's now time for 3 leading authorities on Ben Nicholson's work to examine Ian and Julie's wall painting and give their verdict. We've already met Dr. Lee Beard. He's working with Dr. Rachel Smith to compile the catalogue raisonné, the complete list of Ben Nicholson's authentic works. They're joined by Dr. Chris Stevens, former head of modern British art at the Tate and now director of the Holborn Museum in Bath.
The overlapping of different shapes reminds me of some other of his compositions.
Well, I think that sort of playful ambiguity between what's in front and what's behind is very Nicholson.
The musical notes and the treble clef just feels too obvious for Nicholson.
He would have more fun with them, I think.
When Ben Nicholson died in 1982, aged 87, he was an internationally famous artist whose work was seen to encapsulate the very essence of British modernism. Could Ian and Julie's wall painting be part of his great legacy?
The experts have deliberated and they've reached a conclusion. The day has come to find out if Ian and Julie's wall painting is a genuine work by Ben Nicholson.
I think we've made a really strong case for this picture. We know that the former owners of Redstream Cottage, Fred and Madge Murray, were friends and patrons of Ben Nicholson. And we have cast iron proof, thanks to photographs and letters, that Ben Nicholson stayed at Redstream Cottage. And we also know that Madge Murray told Ian's neighbour Derek, as well as members of her own family, that Ben Nicholson painted that picture on the wall. On the other hand, we also know that experts have concerns about some aspects of the picture, and that is a worry.
The outcome of today will decide whether or not Ian and Julie's painting is taken down and conserved or left where it is, risking further deterioration. The evidence for it stylistically, to my mind, is very powerful. This has all the characteristics, the motifs of a work by Ben Nicholson. And the complexity and the multi-layered nature of it would suggest the work of one hand rather than two. And also, there's the inscription Bach running through it. And we know that Nicholson's passion for the composer surfaced at the exact time that he was staying at Redstream Cottage. Set against all of this, however, is the thought of Fred Murray, the artist, someone who worked very much in the style of Ben Nicholson. In the end, will that cast an irredeemably dark shadow over this picture?
Ian and Julie are on their way to the gallery, and we're all about to discover whether their painting has been accepted as a genuine work by Ben Nicholson.
Hello.
Hello. Hiya. So this is the moment. Dare I ask, how are you feeling?
I think he's pretty nervous.
What about you?
I don't really know, actually. I think I'm going to catch him if he falls.
Well, look, we submitted our dossier of evidence to the Ben Nicholson experts, and the verdict is in here. So, I'm feeling quite tense myself now. Philip, just remind us, if this is a work by Ben Nicholson, what kind of value are we talking?
Well, if this could be proved to be a genuine work by the great painter, it's worth £200,000. And that would allow you to save the work, to have it preserved.
And if it's not?
Well, if it's not, then it's just a pretty piece of decoration painted on the bedroom wall. And it's, with much consideration, worthless.
Are you ready for me to open this?
Yes,
Champagne or beer?
Dear Ian and Julie, following our close inspection of the wall painting and careful consideration of the evidence provided, we are of the opinion that this work does contain elements consistent with the work of the artist Ben Nicholson.
So it is Ben Nicholson?
There's a second paragraph. However, we also strongly believe that parts of the composition are by a different hand, in most likelihood that of Fred Murray. It's our conclusion that this artwork is probably an informal, collaborative piece and potentially the result of a playful artistic dialogue between Ben Nicholson and his close friend and supporter, Fred Murray.
What does that mean?
What does that mean, Philip?
Is it worthless?
All is not lost. In fact, far from it. We're dealing with something most unusual. A collaboration with Ben Nicholson and another artist, something he wasn't known to have done. And I say another artist, I mean, he was an amateur, but he was somebody who could paint, and also a pivotal part of his life. So it's entwining two crucial figures together who were connected to each other. It's a very personal thing.
I just assumed, well, it's either going to be Ben or Mr. Murray. So to have them both there, it's a story, isn't it? It's great.
I can imagine lots of people being both intrigued and drawn to it, and potential collectors as well. And I think it would be worth between £50,000 and £100,000.
I'm glad we kept it. I'm glad we kept it. That's brilliant.
And what do you think you'll do with this now? I mean, we'll obviously...
It's coming off the wall.
Is
it's coming off. Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
Do I have to be at home when it's coming off the wall?
It's too fragile anyway, and it's not, you know, it needs looking after.
So next step, try and get it off the wall.
Yep.
That's up
Fingers
to you.
crossed, yeah.
After weeks of careful planning, Conservator Tom Organ is attempting to remove the wall painting from Redstream Cottage.
Today's the day. It looks like it's going to be coming out.
This is a risky process. The plaster could crack, so layers of special tissue have been applied to try and keep the painted surface in place. A large section of the wall needs to be removed with the painting, so to minimise the possibility of collapse, the plaster and bricks have been sandwiched between two ply sheets which are tightly braced together.
Bit nervous because this is quite an important bit now. This is where it could go really badly wrong. If it's going to go wrong, this is the time it's going to go. It could just disintegrate into millions of pieces.
Tom uses a variety of power tools to cut through the wall around the painting.
It's been a long day. They've been up there quite a few hours. If I'd been doing this, we would have had a big cutter and it would have been done in about 30 minutes, I would have thought. But it wouldn't be in one piece.
At last, the wall painting has been detached from Redstream Cottage. It's now on its way to Tom's studio.
For nearly 20 years, Ian and Julie have been custodians of the wall painting, but now it's left their care for good. This extraordinary work of art has been rescued from any further damage and deterioration. Over the coming months, it will undergo painstaking restoration to get it ready for sale as a work by Fred Murray and Ben Nicholson.
At 42 million.
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
Sold, thank you very much.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
But my God, there's a lot at stake with this one.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye. I don't believe it.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue. It's like a challenge. Who am I? But not every painting is quite what it seems.
Just the sort of thing you might associate with a faked painting.
It's a journey that can end in joy.
It is indeed by John Constable.
Oh, brilliant.
Wonderful.
Or bitter disappointment.
The work is not by Henry Moore. So sorry.
In this episode, could this delicate sketch be a work by one of the biggest names in modern art, famed for his otherworldly portraits, Amedeo Modigliani?
That's that face that you would recognise in an artistic crowd. This is quintessential Modigliani.
We journey across France to investigate this family treasure, which has questions hanging over it.
Unfortunately, they were unwilling to authenticate the drawing.
Ouch. But we're dealing with one of the art world's most forged artists.
It is so out of place and uncharacteristic.
Can forensic analysis bring this work back into the light?
We have a match.
Perfect. Or is it a fake by one of the world's most audacious forgers?
I don't want to put you on the spot here, Mark, but that is a crime.
This week's case brings us to London. We're heading south of the river. We've been contacted by the owner of a mysterious work of art which has been with one family for generations. Henrietta Sitwell is a publicist who works with galleries and museums across Britain. She's asked for our help because she hopes she might have a museum piece of her own.
Hi, Fiona. Hi, Philip. Come in.
Hello.
Thank you, nice to see you.
So here it is.
So what are we looking at here? A faintly but very beautifully drawn sketch of a woman seated, a child on her lap, and then in the top left, a signature Modigliani.
And certainly looking at the face in those almond-shaped eyes, I mean, that is exactly what you'd expect, isn't it, as a Modigliani?
Amedeo Modigliani is one of the most influential and notorious artists of the 20th century. He was born in Italy in 1884 and moved to Paris in 1906, where he met avant-garde painters like Picasso. Modigliani was a wild character who led a troubled life fueled by drinking, drug-taking and womanizing. His portraits brought a bohemian underworld to life, capturing artists, writers, prostitutes and other denizens of the Paris cafes. Modigliani's distinctive style is characterized by elongated figures and mask-like faces inspired by African art. He never enjoyed commercial success during his lifetime. Plagued by poverty, poor health and excess, he died penniless, aged just 35.
Lot 8, painted in Paris.
Since his death, he's become a legend. And today, Modigliani is one of the most valuable artists in the world.
At $152 million. Sold here.
Could the artist who created some of the most expensive works ever sold have also made this delicate sketch?
How do you come by this?
I inherited the drawing from my father, who had inherited it from his father, Sacheverell Sitwell, the writer, poet and collector.
And do you remember this in your family home?
Absolutely. I remember it hanging in the library at our family home, away from the light, just in a corner.
So has it always been considered an authentic work by Modigliani?
Absolutely. In our family, we've never been under any doubt.
Then what's the problem now?
Well, as the owner of this delightful drawing, I felt that it was my obligation to make sure that the insurance valuations were up to date. So I approached a couple of major auction houses to see if they could help.
Henrietta hoped the auction houses would value the sketch. To her dismay, they refused.
They were unwilling to authenticate the drawing, and one of them even said that they would offer it up merely as a decorative item.
Ouch. Because that just means it could be by anybody, but kind of looks nice, so they'll sell it for whatever. Not very much, I suspect. So that must have been quite a blow then. I mean, you've grown up with this as a Modigliani.
Yes, exactly. And I was determined then to find out to prove that it really is by Modigliani.
And that's where we come in. So are there particular problems with trying to authenticate a Modigliani?
Yeah, because he's much faked, particularly his drawings. And you can see why, you know, the clarity and sort of formulaic way he draws is easily ripped off.
So if this is by Modigliani, which obviously you're fervently hoping it will be, Henrietta, what would it be worth?
So if it could be proved to be by Modigliani, I can see it being worth up to £100,000.
Were you expecting that?
No, not at all.
If it isn't by Modigliani, then?
A few £100. It's a decorative drawing.
It's a bit of a difference, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I'm hoping for the former.
So the question is, was your grandfather around at the right place, at the right time, to buy a genuine Modigliani, or has he ended up with a fake?
The first step to answering this question is to take a closer look at the sketch. I'm using a halogen torch to see if any clues reveal themselves.
This is so easily the sort of drawing that you could pass by without noticing. But the more you look into it, the more you're drawn into it. It's bewitching, it's fascinating up close. And I suppose what I find most affecting of all, and it's centred on the face, is the economy, is the ease with which so much poise and beauty is imparted just through a few simple strokes and lines. That exquisite aquiline shaped bone of the nose, and those almond eyes, just the tops of the lids. And then when you add that beautifully elongated neck and that tilt of the head, it finishes it off. That's that face that you would recognise in an artistic crowd. This is quintessential Modigliani. But the very thing that distinguishes this as a Modigliani face is its peril, because this is something that fakers copy. You know, you can imagine it's a reasonably straightforward job to do. It's quite formulaic, it's quite simple.
While Philip looks deeper into the drawing, I want to learn more about its history in Henrietta's family. The sketch's original owner, Henrietta's grandfather, Sir Cheverel Sitwell, died in 1988, when she was just a child. But as a young man, he was an important figure in the history of British art and literature. He and his siblings, Edith and Osbert, were bright young things of the 1920s and 30s. But is there any record of them acquiring works by Modigliani?
So tell me a bit more about your grandfather. Did he have any direct connection to Modigliani?
Yes, he met Modigliani in Paris with his brother Osbert in 1918. He was given a letter of introduction and they went to his studio.
So he actually met him and presumably liked the work that he saw?
Yes, I think liked it so much that Sir Cheverel and his brother Osbert were offered the entire contents of Modigliani's studio shortly before he died for, I think, the sum of £1,000.
And what happened?
Well, unfortunately, they asked their father if he would lend them the money, but he refused.
Because that would have been, what, 1920, which is when Modigliani died.
Yes.
And they were going to buy the whole contents of his studio.
Yes, I know, and desperately sad, didn't manage to raise the funds.
So if Sir Cheverel and Osbert didn't succeed in buying a studio packed full of Modigliani's art, did they at least manage to acquire one genuine work by him? We need evidence, and on the back of the picture, I may have spotted our first potential leads. There are two inscriptions. A conservator who restored and reframed the picture in 1984 has written their name. They're no longer in business, but above, they've written a clue, possibly transcribed from the back of the original frame.
There's an address on the back of 2 Carlisle Square. Does that ring any bells for
Well,
you?
yes, number 2 Carlisle Square was where Sir Cheverel and Osbert were living in the early 20s. So one might be led to believe that the picture was hanging there at some point.
I mean, this is quite, as provenance goes, this is not bad, Henrietta, I have to tell you. So you've got your grandfather who owned the picture, who knew Modigliani. I mean, that's pretty good going so far. We now, though, have to say not only that your grandfather knew Modigliani, but that this particular drawing was by the man himself.
Yes. It's exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
If we do manage to establish that this is by Modigliani, how do you feel about that?
Well, I'll be delighted, actually, for my grandfather, because it would prove that he had a great eye and that he had spotted a master at work, and that, you know, we weren't to know that Modigliani would become one of the greatest painters of the 20th century, but Sir Cheverel spotted him as a young man, and I think it would be just lovely to know that he was right.
Despite Henrietta's hopes of proving her sketch genuine, there's no escaping the fact that Modigliani is a widely forged artist. The more time I spend with it, the more questions I have.
There are a couple of aspects to this drawing which do slightly concern me. I've never seen this profile head of a child next to an adult like this, a double portrait. It's probably because I haven't seen enough works by the artist, but that's something that I need to assure myself of. And there's also another aspect, which is, well, I find it unsettling, and that is the forearm. It looks faltering, unfinished. I need to make sure that his drawings do include passages that might be a little bit rough compared to other elements. There's potentially a fascinating lead with this picture, and it's in the top left-hand corner, an inscription, and it says, "A Zoborowski," to Zoborowski. If we can work out who that is, it may well take us further to proving whether this is the real thing, real work by Modigliani, or not.
With our investigation up and running, I'm heading across London to the Courtauld Art Library. I need to find out about Modigliani's career as an artist, and crucially, whether Henrietta's sketch might fit into his body of work. Usually the best place to start is the catalogue raisonné, a comprehensive record of genuine works by an artist. In the case of Modigliani, there are several to choose from. So it appears that since Modigliani's death in 1920, there have been not one, not two, but 5 separate catalogue raisonnés, lists of the artist's authenticated works. The key question is there anything like Henrietta's drawing in any of them? It's clear to see Modigliani was a compulsive sketcher, dashing off pictures of his friends. Going through these sketches, you feel you're getting much closer to Modigliani himself. The kind of life he was leading, who he was hanging out with. Pablo Picasso here in a portrait, Diego Rivera. I mean, these are the kind of artists that Modigliani was spending his time with, being influenced by. And then there's a name that keeps cropping up, Leopold Zubrowski. Look, here's an oil painting of him. Here's a sketch of him. There are lots of them. And if you remember, Zubrowski is the name that Henrietta's drawing is dedicated to. Looking further into Modigliani's biography, it turns out Leopold Zubrowski was an important figure in the artist's life. Zubrowski was a Polish poet and writer who moved to Paris in 1913 and became Modigliani's friend and, tantalizingly, his art dealer. If Henrietta's drawing belonged to Zubrowski or passed through his hands on its way to Sacheverell Sitwell, that would add extra significance to the work. It's encouraging that Henrietta's sketch is similar in style to the works listed in these catalogues. But there's a problem. With so many Modigliani catalogues created over the years by different scholars, which one can we trust? The earliest catalogue raisonné dates from 1929, the latest from just a few years ago. And the thing is, they don't seem to agree on much. One of them has about 300 genuine paintings listed, another 400. And that is one heck of a discrepancy. What is clear is that when it comes to Modigliani scholarship, there have been some major problems. Doing some research online, it's clear that some of these catalogue raisonné by various authors have been discredited over the years, including this one by Christian Parizeau. Now, there was a time when he was the go-to man if you wanted to authenticate Italian works of art. But in 2013, he was arrested and then convicted not only of faking, but also endorsing fake Modigliani paintings and drawings. So when it comes to his catalogue raisonné, I think we just have to rule it out.
With the catalogues proving unreliable or incomplete, I'm heading to France in search of known masterpieces by Modigliani. Just across the channel lies the city of Lille, a cultural hub of the north. Henrietta and I have come to the Museum of Modern Art. It holds a fantastic collection of Modigliani paintings, displayed alongside the African masks which so inspired him. We need to take a close look at some genuine Modigliani works. Can we see the same hand in these oil paintings as in Henrietta's pencil sketch?
This nude is the type of painting I think you could say he's most famous for, perhaps one should say infamous. But actually, I haven't asked you what you think about Modigliani.
I have to say, honestly, I do really like his work, particularly his paintings. And I think there's something about the facial features, even though exaggerated, you know that these are real people.
You've touched upon a really interesting and important point. And I think it relates to your drawing as well. Get up close. There is a sense of the individual. There's a sort of manipulation of the features which suggests a distinct character. And I think that's also partly what got him into trouble. In 1917, he had an exhibition of nudes, his only one-artist exhibition. And 2 of them were seized by the police because they literally stopped the traffic. And I think it was partly because, yes, obviously nudes, but they could have been idealized. They weren't. There's always a person lurking beneath.
There's one painting we need to see which I hope will help progress our investigation. A mother and child captured by Modigliani. It's the same composition as Henrietta's sketch. Does her work show any stylistic similarities to this genuine painting?
This is everything that you really want in Modigliani. It's a monumental work, and I mean, I think it's an absolutely knockout painting.
Well, what I instantly recognise is that clunky curve arm, which I recognise from my drawing.
That arm is interesting, isn't it? It's a little bit clumsy, almost unresolved, yet the upper body of the picture, that exquisitely lit, mask-like face, and the rest is more polished and resolved. And you get that sort of slightly strange juxtaposition in your drawing, almost as if the artist, and let's hope it's Modigliani, has got a little bit bored on the bottom part.
He very much looks like he's working from top to bottom.
But above all with this painting, why I think it's so relevant to us is what it expresses emotionally, because this is not just a head. He's moving on to something a little bit more ambitious, an emotional relationship between a mother and a child.
Which I have in my drawing too, that connection, that intimacy between mother and child.
The stylistic similarities may be compelling, but back in the UK, I need to hunt down some concrete provenance. The family story is that the sketch was bought by Sir Cheverel after World War I, but so far, we've no physical proof of that. I've come to Northamptonshire to see Henrietta's mum, Susanna.
Oh, hello. Please come in. Lovely to meet you.
It's very nice to meet you, thank you.
She's letting me delve into the family archives to see if I can find any record of the picture having been bought by Henrietta's grandfather.
Let's have a look in here. So the earlier the record is, the better. If I can prove, with the help of all this, that Sir Cheverel owned this picture back in the 40s, the 30s, even as far back as the 20s, even better, that will fill a huge gap in its history and make the chance of it being a forgery much less likely.
But with a family like the Sitwells, there's an unusual issue.
When we're looking through a family archive on fake or fortune, the problem is usually there's not enough of it. But I mean, look at all of this. The Sitwells were a family who had a real sense of their place in history. And as far as I can see, they documented, kept pretty much every cutting, every newspaper article that was ever written about them, and there were a lot. Thing is, though, in amongst all of this, am I going to find the one piece of information that is going to prove our picture? It's a bit like looking for a needle in a haystack.
The best lead we have so far is 2 Carlisle Square, the address transcribed on the back of the frame. This was where Sir Cheverel lived with his brother Osbert after World War I, when he was supposed to have bought the work. Rather wonderfully, the interior of Carlisle Square was photographed for Homes and Gardens magazine in 1936. I can see the walls are filled with the Sitwells' impressive collection of art. I'm trying to spot Henrietta's sketch, but can't see it anywhere. An even more intriguing image, dating further back to the early 1920s, is this oil painting, which depicts the drawing room. Could this be Henrietta's sketch hanging in 2 Carlisle Square? Frustratingly, it's just too insubstantial to be sure.
With that mountain of family archive in those 2 trunks, I was sure we'd find some kind of smoking gun. But no documentary evidence, no photographic proof, nothing.
The lack of hard evidence is troubling. Perhaps an auction house had good reason to be nervous about Henrietta's sketch. We're in shark-infested waters. Back in London, I've been doing some research into Modigliani forgeries, and there's more disturbing news.
Experts believe there are something like 1,000 fake Modiglianis in circulation at the moment. Imagine. And in 2017, there was a high-profile exhibition in Genoa. 100,000 people came to see the Modiglianis. 20 of the 21 on display were deemed to be fake. The police came, they raided the exhibition, seized the works, and destroyed the fakes. There have been a number of known Modigliani forgers over the years. One of the most notorious was the Hungarian-born faker Elmir Dahori. In the years after World War II, after struggling as an artist in his own right, he turned to forgery. He sold hundreds of fakes to collectors all over the world, including supposed Modiglianis, before finally being exposed in the 1960s. With so many Dahori fakes in circulation, is there a risk Henrietta's sketch could be one of them? I've contacted a man in America who knew Dahori better than most, his secretary and biographer, the brilliantly named Mark Forgy. I'm hoping he can shine a light on Henrietta's sketch. Mark, very nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All the way from Minneapolis. Let's just talk about Elmir Dahori. So when did you know him? When were you working with him?
I met Elmir in the fall of 1969. I ended up working for Elmir and living with him for 8 years, from 1969 until his death in 1976.
And can I ask you, did you see him do any Modigliani forgeries in that time?
I did. I was present when a friend of Elmir's asked him if he could do a small drawing. This person needed some financial assistance. Elmir did a small Modigliani drawing, gave it to her, but didn't sign it. And she then, later on, we found out, sold it as an original Modigliani drawing.
Whoa. So that is out there as an original?
Yes.
And that, I don't want to put you on the spot here, Mark, but that is a crime. I mean, there he was doing a fake Modigliani for a friend to then sell on who was harder cash.
You have to understand the contextual circumstances. When I met Elmir, this was in the late 60s. We championed rebels at that time. So I saw Elmir not as a criminal, but kind of a folk hero, thumbing his nose at the art establishment.
But it's still fraud, Mark, however you dress it up.
Yes, it's fraud with a flair.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. But nonetheless, he faked many, many Modiglianis. The $64,000 question is, Henrietta's picture, do you think that is by Elmir Dahori?
I don't see it as a product of Elmir's hand.
Well, that is a relief,
but
I have to say.
But what I find problematic about the drawing, there are a number of red flags that I see. It is not a very accomplished drawing. When you look at the paper-thin profile of the young girl, she has this full frontal eye when she's in full profile. It is so out of place and uncharacteristic. I don't think you'll find anything like that if you look at Modigliani's oeuvre. It's just so improbable.
Right. Not good enough to be by Dahori. I mean, that's something.
With forgers like Dahori polluting the market, we need to subject Henrietta's sketch to a forensic examination. If genuine, it should be over 100 years old. Could science help prove this? To find out, I brought the drawing to Nicholas Burnett, one of the country's leading conservators for works on paper. Hello, Nicholas.
Hello, Philip.
So, here it is.
Interesting. So, shall we unframe it?
Yes, please. Henrietta's sketch hasn't been taken out of its frame for nearly 4 decades, since it was restored and reframed in 1984. As Nicholas carefully removes the backboard, will we find something on the back of the picture which could help us?
So, are we at the point of a revelation?
Yes.
Oh, nothing there. Completely blank. Not even a rogue pencil mark.
Despite the lack of clues, I can see that the sketch has been backed onto a piece of Japanese paper, a kind of tissue used to conserve fragile works. Now we have the picture out of the frame, Nicholas wants to check for optical brightening agents. These were only added to paper after World War II, so they shouldn't appear in a sketch by Modigliani, who died in 1920. To see them, we need to examine the sketch under ultraviolet light.
So I've got a modern sheet of paper here that has optical brightening agents in. Okay, so we'll look at that and we'll see how this one reacts. Now, to protect your eyes, thank you. And here we go.
So you're going to pass the beam over it?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's highly distinctive, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's properly glowing in the dark.
Literally.
Yeah.
Now, for the drawing.
So if this is to be an early piece of paper of the right sort of date, we don't want it to glow in the dark.
Yeah, that's it. Wow, that's a good sign.
It's mercifully dull.
Yes, yes. You put the two alongside each other, it's like chalk and cheese.
They couldn't be more distinctly different.
No.
So then this at least proves that the paper that is being used for this drawing is old.
Yes, it proves that it's not a really bad modern forgery.
This is reassuring. And with the lights back on, my eye is drawn to one detail I hadn't seen before.
Now that's interesting. 2 lines of stain around the edge where the paper at various times has faded in the light, suggesting therefore that before the present framing or mounting, this has been done twice before that.
Yes.
And that would cover a long period of time. I mean, why not a century?
Quite possibly they don't form overnight, they take years to form. There's one other interesting thing. This edge is perforated like the edge of a stamp.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. It's been torn from, I would think, a sketchbook. So we can measure the spacing of the perforations, and if we can compare that to other known drawings by Modigliani, that'd be quite useful evidence.
Nicholas measures the height, width and thickness of the drawing.
1 dot, 1 line, down the centre.
Then one final vital statistic. The number of perforations per inch along the torn edge.
So that's 11.3, give or take.
So you can reduce these serrations to a number, 11.3, and that 11.3 might match up with another 11.3 that could take us closer to Modigliani.
That would be lovely, yeah.
We now know Henrietta's drawing has been torn from a sketchbook. Could it have been ripped from Modigliani's? Back at the gallery, I've managed to locate a rare gem, a completely intact sketchbook which once belonged to the artist.
This is a sketchbook in the Pompidou Centre in Paris, done about 1916. It is full of original, totally accepted works by the great Modigliani. And immediately you can see that there are, I think, stylistic comparisons with Henrietta's. Look at the face here, the concentration on the detail. It almost falls away beneath in that lumpy, stumpy way. I mean, these drawings really are delightful. He's catching life on the move around him in cafes or whatever. A bit like you might with a smartphone, taking images of friends. This is a Picasso.
And actually, look at that eye and look at that nose. To me, that bears a resemblance to Henrietta's picture. And also, Mark Forgy said you would never see a Modigliani profile with those vacant almond eyes. But look, it's not quite a profile, it's 3/4, but it's near as damn it.
But it's not just the stylistic comparison, which I think is potentially exciting. There's the physical as well. If you look carefully, of course, you can see perforations, this sort of serrated edge. Now imagine if we can prove that the perforation measurement of Henrietta's is the same as that in the drawings at the Pompidou Centre.
Amazing. And what about the size of the paper itself? Is Henrietta's the same as the one in the Pompidou?
Well, that's a really interesting point, because we have, down to the last millimetre or half millimetre, the dimensions of Henrietta's, 430.5, 264. What we need to do is go to the Pompidou Centre, put them together, see if they're the same.
But then there's one thing I want to look at as well, which is the dedication in the top left to Zborowski. That must be Leopold Zborowski, who is Modigliani's dealer. I can't think who else it would be. And then the question arises, why would Sir Cheverel Sitwell have a sketch that was dedicated to someone else? Why would it not be kept by Zborowski himself?
Our investigation has raised some crucial questions. I'm hoping we can find the answers back in France. I've come to Paris. Armed with Henrietta's sketch, I'm heading to the Pompidou Centre, which holds one of the world's leading collections of modern art. Anne Montfort-Tanguy is head of the drawings collection. She's agreed to give me special access to Modigliani's personal sketchbook. I'm keen to see how Henrietta's drawing compares to this treasure trove of genuine works.
This is a sketchbook we bought in 1964, owned by Jeanne Hébuterne, the last companion of Modigliani, so we are sure of its provenance.
So it's come from the family of his common law wife?
Yes.
So you can't really get a better provenance than that?
No.
With such strong pedigree, we can be certain the drawings in this sketchbook are genuine. The stylistic similarities are compelling. Modigliani's drawings are beautifully, rapidly composed and often incomplete, just like Henrietta's sketch. But crucially, how does the paper measure up?
The first thing I'd love to be able to establish is whether the paper on ours is the same dimensions as a sketchbook like this, because having a sketch from a sketchbook and a sketchbook together is rather tempting in terms of a comparison, is it not?
Could Henrietta's sketch be drawn on the same kind of paper Modigliani used?
It's exactly the same size.
Exactly the same size. That's a wonderful fit. So we can assume that if our drawing is by Modigliani, he was using a similar, if not almost identical sketchbook.
Yes.
To the one that you have.
Yes. And the quality of paper also makes us believe that it is exactly the same.
Now for the most important comparison. Do the serrations along the torn edges match? Nicholas has kindly lent me his perforation guide. If we get the same reading of 11.3, then we can say that Henrietta's sketch comes from exactly the same kind of sketchbook that Modigliani used.
11.3.
Yes.
We have a match.
Perfect.
A matching perforated edge. Such a small detail, but one that will greatly strengthen our case.
We're dealing with the same design of paper taken from an almost identical book. The right proportions, the right colour, given the fading. I feel rather excited, actually.
While Philip has made a huge step forward, across Paris, Henrietta has joined me to try and nail the provenance. We need to find out how her grandfather might have acquired a sketch bearing the name of Modigliani's art dealer, Zborowski. The family know Sir Cheverel came here to meet Modigliani in 1918. His journey would have taken him along these streets, through one of the most bohemian quarters of Paris.
So Henrietta, we're in Montparnasse, in the south of Paris, and this rather unremarkable little street, Cité Falguière it's called, In between World War I and World War II was the focus of a great outpouring of creative talent. Artists from all over the world came here for the cheap rents and the company of like-minded souls. And the names that we're creating here are the greats to this day. So Degas, Dali, Giacometti, and most importantly of all,
our man.
Our man, Modigliani, exactly.
Right here in this space.
In this
area.
space. And it's only this studio at the end now that is still in use.
Right.
Atelier 11, Studio 11 it's called. And this is pretty much as it was back then. This was where Modigliani would often work. It was the studio of his friend and fellow artist, Chaim Soutine. Life was pretty desperate for these two struggling artists. Now, it all looks quite bohemian now, Henrietta. Imagine what it was like in Modigliani's day. No running water, no heating, infestations of lice. Pretty squalid, really.
Yes.
Let me read you an extract from this biography of Modigliani, which just gives you an idea of what it was like. It's talking about a couple of people walking past the Cité Falguière, so this street here. Near the door, he found Modigliani and Soutine, his friend, Chaim Soutine, lying next to each other on mattresses, with water splashed all around their little island to discourage the bedbugs.
Oh, yes, that's a very real picture, isn't it? Of
So it was
literally just on the floor there.
Yeah, so it was pretty squalid in those days. There was one person who would become Modigliani's saviour. Leopold Zubrowski, the name on Henrietta's sketch. I've been digging into their relationship, and I found that Zubrowski put Modigliani up in his own home and gave him the two largest rooms to work in. He clearly, utterly believed in his talent, and he would walk the streets of Paris, dragging people into studios like this to look at Modigliani's work, to try to sell it. He'd have to show it by candlelight, because more often than not, the electricity was cut off. But he was determined that others would see what he saw.
I've never seen pictures of him before, so this is a real treat, actually.
The close relationship between Modigliani and Zubrowski could explain why the sketch is dedicated to him. A gift, perhaps, from a grateful artist. We're building up a picture of possible provenance. We now need to work out how the sketch might have passed from Zubrowski to Henrietta's grandfather. Could it be when Sechevreul visited Modigliani in his studio? It's likely Zubrowski would have been there too.
The story's starting to come alive for me now, actually. I'm starting to imagine how it might have been produced, where it was produced, and the connections with my grandfather, Sechevreul. And it just makes me even start to wonder whether my grandfather was in this space with Zubrowski and with Modigliani. I'm wondering if he'd actually walked through these very doors.
We're leaving Paris with compelling, if circumstantial, provenance. We still need to search for something more concrete. Back in London, I'm catching up with Philip at the gallery. I've been delving into the written works of the Sitwells, and I've found some thrilling first-hand evidence.
Take a look at this cover of a book by Sir Osbert Sitwell, Laughter in the Next Room. And this is a book he wrote, an autobiography from World War I to the 1920s. And in it, he talks about a trip he made to Biarritz. And he refers to his brother Sechevreul having been to Paris just before coming to Biarritz.
He had been especially impressed by the work of Picasso and of Modigliani, and had made arrangements for an exhibition in London the following summer by the various modern masters of Paris.
So Sechevreul's trip inspired him to show the work of Modigliani to the British public for the very first time. And there's a tantalising quote.
He had also purchased a fine drawing by Modigliani and brought this with him.
So there we have the first written evidence that Sechevreul bought a Modigliani drawing. There's more. This is a book by Sechevreul himself, For Want of the Golden City, and it's a rather extraordinary tome ranging across a whole variety of subjects: biography, architecture, art history, and a rather unexpected and in-depth discussion about professional wrestling on television.
Those brothers wrote about anything that moved.
They did. Now here you've got Sacheverell talking about his trip to Paris before he went to Biarritz. He'd bought several drawings from Modigliani for £1 a piece. I mean, imagine that these days. Which drawings were later, and not by myself, packed as wrappings for my shoes in the hotel at Biarritz.
No!
But what this does show us is that Sacheverell bought Modigliani drawings. This is him saying it in his own words. I mean, what's happened to these drawings is lost in the mist of time.
This is a hugely promising step. We can now say for certain that Henrietta's grandfather bought drawings by Modigliani. But without any descriptions that point to her sketch, will this be enough to persuade the authority on the artist? Across London, we're trying to piece together the story of the exhibition Henrietta's grandfather staged. We found that in 1919, Sacheverell and his brother Osbert organised an exhibition of modern French art at a gallery in Heels, the London department store. This featured works by some of Paris's most exciting young artists, including Modigliani. The other person responsible for setting up this exhibition was none other than Modigliani's art dealer, Zubrowski. Now we have a proven link between Sacheverell and the name on the sketch. The staff at Heels have agreed to help us recreate the exhibition. They've hung the gallery walls with reproductions of the Modigliani works displayed for sale over a century ago. I'm hoping we can discover whether Henrietta's sketch was one of them.
So, Henrietta, these on the wall were the type of paintings that shocked and excited London society, thanks to the work of your ancestors. And I've got to ask you, what does it feel like to be the granddaughter of the man who had such an impact?
I feel thrilled to be here amongst the sorts of paintings that Sacheverell, or Sachi as I knew him, brought to London for the first time is, I mean, you've really amazed me.
Well, we couldn't get the real things because frankly, we'd be looking at about £1 billion worth of Modigliani on the walls here. I mean, it really divided society. I mean, the Times described these things, thanks to your grandfather, as ghastly. But others just thought, whoa, this is the beginning of something new and thrilling. So it was such a bold manoeuvre.
I've been doing some digging, and in the Courtauld Institute archives, I've discovered something which could provide crucial evidence.
So it might not look much, but what I'm holding here, Henrietta, is an artistic lightning bolt. Your grandfather's exhibition.
Gosh, I mean, at first glance, it just looks like a sort of boring old manual, doesn't it? But I can see it says Catalogue of Exhibition of French Art, 1914 to 1919. So this is it.
Now, let me just turn the pages. You've got major artists like Derain and Matisse.
Picasso, Modigliani, there we are.
But it's the last page I want you to cast your eyes over. Have a look at this.
In 4 portfolios, drawings, 50 by Modigliani.
50 drawings. And we know that they were offered in a portfolio for about £1 a piece. We also know that quite a few were left over. And what we have here are scans, replicas of the type of drawings that we think were in the exhibition.
Yes, look.
Just imagine, you wanted to come away like a sort of party bag from the exhibition. You want to come away with something. You could have picked up one of these.
A souvenir, yes.
One of these little priceless objects.
What a bargain. Oh, and look. I recognise that.
Okay. All right then. So we've popped your drawing in there because it really isn't impossible that your drawing was part of this group.
An account of the exhibition states that many of these drawings were left unsold. It's not hard to imagine how Henrietta's sketch might have made its way into Sacheverell's hands.
I think I'm feeling now that this is exactly the sort of provenance that this might have if it is by the master. Why not one of those that was at this exhibition, in this gallery?
It's a thrilling thought, actually, yeah.
The circumstantial evidence is stacking up. But if we're to convince the authority on the artist, we're going to need more concrete proof. One final clue we need to address is the signature. Is this by the hand of Modigliani or a forger? To find out, I've sent it to one of the country's leading forensic handwriting experts, Adam Brandt. He's been comparing the signature on Henrietta's work to known Modigliani sketches, but he's found the task isn't straightforward.
There are certain problems in the sense that when you compare this with the known signatures of Modigliani, the comparison isn't exact.
Adam has been looking at the baseline, an imaginary line which runs along the bottom of the letters.
If you look at the baseline,
yes,
and you compare that with the known signatures, it's very different. Some drop down from G to L, some bounce up at I, and so on.
It's erratic, unpredictable.
Absolutely.
With the signature on Henrietta's sketch, the baseline is relatively smooth, but in genuine Modigliani signatures, there's a huge variation, making comparison almost impossible.
There isn't much consistency that one can say, look, this is what we have to compare. It's not crystal clear. Okay?
Because Modigliani seems to be a bit all over the place.
Yes, but where I am starting to feel happier about this is when you move to the issue of pen lifts. When people are writing quite quickly, they don't realise that they are lifting the pen. If you look at the way that he takes the pen off the paper at the top of the D, off the paper at the bottom of the I, and he takes it off the paper to reach up to make that A, amongst the known signatures, you see something similar. There's a nice consistency here. So for the first time, this critical area of unconscious movement of lifting a pen starts to be similar.
This is much more encouraging. When signing his name, Modigliani was consistent in when he took his pen off the page, at the D, the I, and just before the A. We see the same pattern in our signature. Would it even occur to a forger to replicate such a subtle characteristic?
So Adam, do you think that this writing is by Modigliani?
Yes, it probably is.
Is there a sort of gap, a space between probably and yes?
Well, in this industry, we use the word probably, so I will stick with the word probably, but I'm, probably this is the case that this signature was written by Modigliani.
With Adam's final piece of the puzzle in place, we've done all that we can.
The day has come to find out if Henrietta's sketch is a genuine work by the great Modigliani.
I think we've made a really good case for Henrietta's sketch. We know that Sacheverell met Modigliani. He bought several of his drawings. He even put on an exhibition of Modigliani at Heels in London in 1919. There were 50 sketches, many left unsold. It's possible that Sacheverell held on to some of them. One of them could have been Henrietta's. There is something that bothers me, though, is given how extensively the Sitwells wrote about every tiny detail of their lives, why is there no reference to Sacheverell and this particular sketch?
Stylistically, this matches the work of Modigliani, both in terms of subject matter, but also technique. The inscription, the signature, are bang on in many ways. The paper exactly matches that found in a sketchbook by Modigliani in the Pompidou Centre. But set against all of that are these dark waters. We are in an area of the art world that's awash with duplicity and fakery. And if I were the person who had to adjudicate yes or no, would I want to stick my neck out and say whether this is by Modigliani?
Now is the moment. we've invited Dr. Kenneth Wayne, one of the world's leading Modigliani authorities, to the gallery. He's regularly called on as an expert by leading auction houses and is currently overseeing a new Modigliani catalogue raisonné. Dr. Wayne is undertaking a thorough examination of Henrietta's sketch and our dossier of evidence. Have we done enough to convince him that the drawing is genuine?
Modigliani was so hard up, he once sold drawings for £1 a sheet. His wild life and early demise meant his legend grew quickly. Today, he's risen to become the tragic rock star of modern art, with collectors vying to own works that still feel dazzlingly vibrant a century later. If authentic, Henrietta's sketch could be worth up to £100,000. If it's a fake, it's only a few hundred. Henrietta is on her way to the gallery, and we're all about to discover whether her drawing is a genuine work by Amedeo Modigliani.
Dr. Wayne, thank you so much for coming here.
Yes.
We'd be very grateful if you could air your thoughts on this.
Sure. With Modigliani, fakes and forgeries are a big issue. In a sense, that's a testament to his popularity. This drawing is a little atypical in that most of his drawings and his paintings are of single figures. This one is 2 figures. It's dedicated to Swarovski, which makes sense because not only was he Modigliani's dealer in 1919, he also was involved directly with this specific exhibition. So there's a connection between Swarovski, the Sitwells, Modigliani.
Given all that, what is your conclusion when it comes to Henrietta's picture?
Well, in the United States, we have a rude expression when we're evaluating things: does it pass the smell test? And in this case, we don't have proof, but it is highly probable that it was shown in the exhibition in 1919 and then came down through the family. I would say that this work passes the smell test.
Okay.
It feels right, it smells right.
Well, that sounds like a fragrant outcome.
Exactly.
Yes.
I think that sounds like a yes. It's a yes.
The smell is right. So.
It is. So how do you feel about it now? Now it's actually got the name Modigliani attached to it.
Well, I actually lost for words for once. No, I'm very excited, and I think it's exciting because it puts my grandfather back in that sort of, it's proof that he was able to make extraordinary discoveries at such a young age, and and to think of such a young man bringing art over with Swarovski like that to put on for the British public. I think if I look back to myself in my 20s, I certainly wasn't finding impressive young artists.
Yeah, and in the same way that you've connected with your grandfather, I feel I've really got to know Modigliani more and just how he works and how he thinks. I feel I know the man better. And there's just one other thought that might be worth carrying with us. The curator of the Pompidou Centre has suggested that there's a possibility, on the grounds of comparison, that the subject of the little girl could be the same as one that was painted in oil by Modigliani in 1918 called Little Girl with Plaits.
I feel rather emotional. Sorry. I think as a mother of 2 young girls, you see a young girl.
And whether we'll ever get the full evidence for this, who knows?
So what's going through your mind, Henrietta? Because I didn't expect that reaction.
No, I didn't think I expected it either, but I think because it's connected to my family, it is more emotional, and it makes you think about family members and about things that might have happened in one's own family that are sort of brought to the fore again. You don't have a chance very often to dig into your own history. You're sort of so busy with your own lives that you don't look back, and when you do, it's quite powerful, actually.
It's become a document, has it not?
Yeah.
The document of proof of what your amazing grandfather achieved.
42 million.
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
So, thank you very much.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
My God, there's a lot at stake with this one.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye. I don't believe it.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue.
It's like a challenge. Who am I?
But not every painting is quite what it seems.
Just the sort of thing you might associate with a faked painting.
It's a journey that can end in joy.
It is indeed, by John Constable.
Oh, brilliant.
Wonderful.
Or bitter disappointment.
The work is not by Henry Moore. So sorry.
In this episode, could this beautiful landscape be a work by one of the giants of Impressionism, Alfred Sisley?
I can't believe that he would have sat here and painted our painting.
If he did paint your painting.
If he did paint our painting.
It looks the part and it bears his signature, but there's a catch. It's already been examined by leading experts.
And the answer they came back with
was no.
The quest to find out the truth about the picture takes in the darkest chapters of the Second World War.
This painting went through one of the most horrifying times in our recent history.
Can cutting-edge technology help solve the mystery?
There's nothing that you've said here that suggests this can't be by Sisley.
It's possible, certainly possible.
Can we gather enough evidence to prove the painting is genuine?
There are enough similarities for us to be excited about Kim and Chuck's painting.
Or have we stumbled into the web of a master forger who's tricked the art world for nearly a century?
Someone had put a Sisley signature on top.
Yeah.
Dastardly.
We receive thousands of emails requesting help to investigate artworks, many of them from abroad. Occasionally, one just has something about it which warrants further investigation.
Hello, fake or fortune team, it says. I'm writing about a painting that I think would be a good prospect for your show. My husband and I purchased an oil painting signed Sisley at auction in 2014 in Illinois. I believe it was presented as in the style of Sisley and had an interesting handwritten letter glued to its back. Now that Sisley is Alfred Sisley, a contemporary of Renoir and Monet.
Alfred Sisley was one of the founding members of the Impressionist movement in 19th century France. The Impressionists rejected conventional ways of painting. They escaped the artist's studio and worked directly from nature, experimenting with light and colour to capture a mood. Born in Paris to English parents, Sisley made several visits to Britain, painting a series of landscapes in London and Wales. In a career spanning 40 years, he created over 1,000 works. During his lifetime, Sisley never gained the recognition he deserved, and he died in poverty. Today, his paintings sell for millions. Could this charming landscape be a long-lost work by the artist known as the English Impressionist?
So, this in itself is not enough to go on, but it is intriguing. And Philip had a look at a picture of the painting that they attached to this email and got so excited about it, he's jetted off to Miami to see it. And sitting here in cold, dark London, I can't help thinking he's done rather well out of this.
In the art world, sometimes a photograph is insufficient. And if the stakes are high enough, you need to see a painting in the flesh. That can take you anywhere. And if it happens to be sunny Miami, all the better. I've arranged to meet Kim and Chuck.
Hi, Kim. Hi, Chuck.
Hello, Philip.
Lovely to
Come
be
on in.
here.
They've retired and now divide their time between their hometown of Chicago and here in Florida.
And here it is, Philip.
Well, so we have a sort of picturesque French scene. It looks like a river, lots of reflection, a big blue sky, choppy water. And then, as you focus in, buildings in the background. And on the left, what looks like a boathouse. In other words, a quintessential, picturesque, impressionist scene. Just the sort of picture you would expect by Alfred Sisley. So how did you come by it?
We were at an auction just outside of Chicago in around 2014, and we were mesmerized by it, and the price was within our range, and we purchased it.
And what was that price?
Approximately $2,600.
So sort of a couple of £1,000 all in?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So how was it described in the sale when you bought it?
Well, in the auction catalog, it said, "in the style of Sisley."
So in the style of means that it evokes the work of Sisley, but it's not by him.
Well, we were hoping, but it wasn't the reason that we bought the painting.
Have you done any research into its provenance?
Yes, after the sale, we contacted the seller to see if she could give us any information. And she did tell us that her grandfather brought the painting over from Germany after World War II. His name was Ernst Donath.
It's helpful to have a head start with the provenance and a name, Ernst Donath, to look into. But anything travelling through Germany during the Second World War will require very careful investigation.
What did you do next in order to try and establish the artist?
Right after we had purchased it, we did take it over to France to see if we could get it authenticated.
You thought it might be right?
We felt that the style was very similar to other Sisley paintings we had seen.
And the answer they came back with?
Was no.
The fact that the painting was rejected by the Sisley Committee, a panel of experts who specialise in the artist's work, is discouraging, but it's not the end of the road. The committee had concerns about the signature, so when Kim and Chuck brought it back to the US, they took it to a restorer.
They cleaned it, and they took off some of the overpainting that had been placed on the painting.
So there was paint on the surface that they removed?
Yes, and it was then that we saw that the Sisley signature became very clear, yes.
Ah. And did the picture change in any other way through cleaning and restoration?
There was a very thick sheet of varnish on the painting that had yellowed and become very dirty over time. And when that varnish was removed, the colors just jumped from the surface of the painting. It was night and day.
Cleaning has dramatically improved the picture, not only revealing the fresh colours and distinctive brushwork, but also a clear signature.
There's quite a lot riding on this. I mean, if one could prove that this was a genuine work by Sisley, value £250,000 or in excess of that. If not, if it is just an imitator, well, you didn't pay an awful lot relative to what it could be worth, £2,000. I don't think it's going to be worth much more than that, possibly less.
Mm-hmm. That's a chance we're willing to take.
Well, whatever happens, I do hope we can get closer to the truth about this intriguing painting.
We appreciate your effort.
While Philip spends more time examining the painting in Miami, back in London, I want to familiarise myself with Sisley's work to see where Kim and Chuck's painting might fit in. I'm on my way to the Courtauld Institute in London, a museum and research centre with one of the finest collections of Impressionist art in the world. We've been given a rare opportunity to examine two authentic works. I'm meeting Anthea Callan, world-renowned Impressionist scholar, to see if she can spot any similarities between Kim and Chuck's landscape and the genuine paintings.
Aren't we fortunate? Two Sisleys, and they're both out of their frames. This is such a rare privilege. And two from the 1870s, about the same period. What I love about this scene of Louveciennes under snow is how he's managed to get the contrast of the trees, the large, tall trees in the foreground, taking us into the composition.
This picture is much more similar to Kim and Chuck's for obvious reasons in that it's depicting a river. And the thing that immediately strikes me is just the drama of this sky.
Yes, it's very typical of Sisley. The wonderful low horizon, but leaves a huge sky which dominates the whole landscape. And notice the way, as you say, he applies the colour very loosely and broadly.
And this is a big departure from the kind of art that people were used to before.
Well, certainly for landscape painting.
So when it comes to Kim and Chuck's painting then, I mean, there's similarities that occur to me. I mean, when you look at the boathouse, for example, and the very sketchy way that's portrayed, but you can still see what you're looking at, the timber here in front, the building. There's definitely a similarity there, would you say?
Yes, yes, more thinly painted here, because I suspect more rapidly painted.
The paint on Boats on the Seine is more thickly applied. Kim and Chuck's feels like it was completed in a hurry, so it's less finished. But the techniques are reassuringly similar.
But other things like just the little daubs to indicate the roofs of the buildings in red here. And you just see these little flecks here.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Very, very typical, very typical. There are enough similarities for, I think, for us to be excited about Kim and Chuck's painting.
Back in Miami, I need to have a really close look at the painting, so I sent it to a fine art conservation studio. I'm meeting conservator Bitsy Cooling.
Hi, Bitsy.
Hi.
Well, I have to say, it's great to see this picture for the first time liberated from its gold frame and out from behind the glass. It looks a rather different picture. Now, with your conservationist's eye, how do you respond to this?
Well, looking at this, it's a lovely painting. There are various elements to this that would suggest that it was painted en plein air, so outside, based on the quickness and looseness of the brushstrokes that we're seeing.
Now, moving to the bottom left-hand corner and the prominent signature, what do you feel about that?
I would actually describe this as being kind of nicely tucked away. He did like to kind of keep his signatures subtle. They'll be in the corner somewhere.
So Sisley didn't like to overly brand his pictures with his signature?
No, that didn't seem to be his style.
So what about what it's painted on?
So this is painted onto panel. Painting on panel is unusual for an Impressionist artist.
Mm-hmm.
So on the back of this panel, you can see that there are these bars attached to the back. It's called a cradle. These are to prevent warping in the panel.
So cradle panels being expensive things, unusual for an Impressionist painter to use.
Yes, exactly. It is very unusual.
And then, of course, there's the label, isn't there? I mean, quite a big one.
Yeah, quite a big label. It has suffered some insect damage, as you can see.
It's indistinct, but it has the name Kunsthalle Bremen in the corner, which refers to a renowned art gallery in northern Germany, and it seems to be some sort of certificate of authenticity, written in German.
It's an interesting graphic lead.
I wonder what the Sisley committee made of this label. It's definitely something we should follow up.
Needs more thought.
It's going to be a challenge, but I've seen enough to know that this painting is worth pursuing.
I'm really pleased that I've now seen this painting in the flesh as opposed to from photographs. There's distinct qualities to it that are worth taking seriously. But this isn't going to be straightforward. Yes, it's been turned down by the committee, but I can't help feeling that Kim and Chuck slightly rushed into it. They didn't have all of their ducks in a row. And something has now changed. The picture itself looks different. It's been conserved. Now, it's quite possible that as a result, there will be things that are manifest which weren't before. Could it now be closer, as far as the committee is concerned, to a work by Sisley?
We've got a lot of research to do, so I'm returning to London with Kim and Chuck's painting.
If we've any hope of convincing the Sisley committee to overturn their decision, we need to understand why they rejected Kim and Chuck's picture. Back at the gallery, I'm updating Philip.
Philip, good to see you. While you've been gallivanting around Miami, some of us have been hard at work.
Sorry, gallivanting. I was working hard. Look what I've come back with.
Yes, well, that is something, I grant you. But what I have been looking at is the letter that Kim and Chuck were sent by the Sisley committee back in 2015. And what it shows us is what we're up against. And basically, we have to reopen a case that has been closed. So the key line here is, unfortunately, in our opinion, the painting was not executed by Alfred Sisley.
Well, that sounds like a death sentence. What was their evidence for it?
One of their key concerns, they say, is a painting that Sisley did in 1888, which they say is a very similar subject.
This authentic work, entitled Moret-sur-Loire, depicts exactly the same view as Kim and Chuck's picture. The Sisley committee say this genuine landscape probably inspired Kim and Chuck's painting, the suggestion being it's a mere copy. But perhaps there's another possibility, that Kim and Chuck's picture is a preparatory work, Sisley's first attempt at capturing this idyllic scene.
They also say that they think the painting is too monotonic, by which they mean the colours are all too similar, of too limited a palette, with not enough contrast to be by the hand of the artist.
Oh, yes, but that was before it was cleaned. And actually, if you have a look at the image halfway through, with the dirty side on the left and the clean side on the right, you can see that it's almost as if a curtain has lifted.
Certainly the contrast is dramatic, isn't it? And the committee haven't seen this. The thing is, the letter from the committee is on the one hand discouraging. It lists all their reservations, but it gives us something to go at. And we've been there before with this same committee. Do you remember the Degas painting, the little ballerina we looked at? They had rejected this picture. We did our investigation, and in the end, we convinced them it was genuine. They have other reservations, though, in the letter. They go into some detail. They say, we couldn't find any cradled panel on any known works by Sisley, they mean, emphasising our doubts on the authenticity of this painting. And of course, this is what we're talking about here.
That's a bit more of an issue. We're going to have to look into that carefully. And science, of course, might help us.
The Sisley Committee has raised serious stylistic and technical concerns about Kim and Chuck's painting. We need to examine the work forensically, so I've sent it to the Courtauld Conservation Studio, a centre of excellence for the scientific study of art. I've arranged to meet Professor Aviva Bernstock. I want her to take a closer look at some of the anomalies on the painting that were singled out by the Sisley Committee.
So, Aviva, what's your first response?
In the corners, there are two little pinholes in each corner, which is interesting because it could suggest that it was maybe stored in a box with some spacers, so half painted, so that when the paint was wet, it could be transported in a special box.
Known as a pochade, this portable accessory was a must for any aspiring artist, allowing them to bring their studio to the countryside and transport a wet painting back in safety.
OK, so another indication, therefore, that it might have been painted out there in the outdoors.
It's one interpretation. And also, it's on panel, a cradled panel.
The wooden panel it's been painted on has been strengthened with strips of wood called a cradle to stop it warping. It's one of the reasons that the committee originally turned down the painting. There are no other Sisleys with a cradled panel.
But if it was cradled, it wouldn't be easily slotted into a box. I don't know whether the cradle's original or not. It seems unlikely if that's the case. It would have been cradled later.
Aviva needs to undertake further research to try and establish whether the panel was cradled when the artist painted the work. If the cradling was added some years later to stop the panel bending, then we can rule out one of the committee's concerns.
It'd be quite good to look under the microscope now to see if I can see anything more of the pigments and the condition of the painting.
If you would, please.
What's really amazing is that all over the picture, wherever you look, you can see brush hairs embedded in the paint. And that suggests the artist used the brush very vigorously and some of the brush hairs broke off and just got stuck in the wet paint. Here's a really long one.
Sort of wildly attacking the panel. And what about the signature?
The signature was. This is red and mixed with black, probably, of the signature. So the paint of the signature is blended in with the wet underlying paint. Trying to avoid, there we are, there's a squiggle of the signature there, applied wet in wet.
This means the signature was applied before the painting had time to dry. This tells us it was done at the same time as the rest of the picture. What it doesn't tell us is whether this is the signature of Sisley himself or the work of a deliberate forger.
You've really created a sense of this coming into life, this picture so far. But is there anything more that will take us closer to Sisley?
I think what I really need to do is to have some time to look at this picture, to use different analytical techniques to confirm the range of pigments that was used and paints, to look at the structure of the painting to see what order it was painted in, how it was made, and that will take some time.
Well, that all sounds really encouraging. Any progress you can make is going to be helpful with this picture. You can see things that we can't.
I hope so.
While Aviva spends more time studying the painting, I'm keen to find out more about where Sisley worked. I'm traveling to a town southeast of Paris, which was a place of inspiration for the Impressionists, Moret-sur-Loire. This is where Sisley moved in 1880, living and painting here until his death in 1899. Kim and Chuck are over in Europe for a month, so I'm taking the opportunity to meet them. We're on a quest. We want to find the exact view depicted in their painting. Sisley mapped out the area through his landscapes. We're following his trail in the hope it will lead us to the right spot. We're starting with the most recognizable landmark in their picture, something that Sisley painted many times.
So here's the church, and look, it's pretty much unchanged from when he painted it in 1894. And we're standing in the exact spot where he would have stood to see this view.
Now we've got our bearings, we're heading out of the center to try and find the spot depicted in Kim and Chuck's picture. We can follow Sisley's paintings like a map.
So let's stand here where Sisley would have stood and painted this sublime view.
Oh my gosh, it's beautiful.
And so much of it is unchanged.
Mm-hmm.
The trees are different, these have changed.
Right.
And the drama of the sky.
He was mostly sky, wasn't he? Sky and water. He loved sky and water.
I love the movement of the water.
Yeah.
But you can see the movement of the clouds and the movement in the leaves on the trees.
Mm-hmm.
And then contrast it with the stillness of the water here.
It's just beautiful.
Should we go a bit further down?
Absolutely.
Sisley said every picture depicts a spot with which the artist has fallen in love. He painted hundreds of paintings here in Moret, all containing many of the same elements. The river, the church, the bridge, but from slightly different angles. To get closer to the view in Kim and Chuck's painting, we need to move downstream.
So we're a bit further along the riverbank from the bridge. We're getting a little bit closer to where your picture was painted.
Yeah, you could see it's a different angle of the river.
You can see a lot of the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
We saw two arcs before.
And the church?
Yes.
Always the church?
Always the church is the focal point. Those trees are gone.
We're definitely getting warmer.
Let's go a bit further down the riverbank.
It's over 120 years since Sisley painted here. While some of the views are more or less the same, a lot has changed, and further away from the town, nature has started to take over, making it harder to match up the views.
So I reckon if we position ourselves about here and look down the river there, I think this is exactly the spot. I mean, it's much more overgrown now, so you can't see the view so clearly. Look, if you look through those trees there, you see, you can just about see the arches of the bridge.
Yeah, and the church.
Mm-hmm. And this boatyard here is now a derelict building on the other side of those trees there, so we can't quite see it.
It's not hard to imagine Sisley opening his pochade case, taking out a fresh panel, and working swiftly to capture a summer's day.
And what this shows us standing here is that this is a real view.
Right.
Whoever painted this will have stood here.
I think absolutely. For all of the colors that are in the water, for the variations in the color in the sky, you would have to be sitting here to be able to capture that beauty.
And we know Sisley painted around here so much. He said he wanted to convey through his painting what he was feeling at the time. I don't know, what does this make you feel?
Pure tranquility. Pure tranquility. It's beautiful. I can't believe that he would have sat here and painted our painting.
If he did paint your painting.
If he did paint our painting.
It's been great coming here with Kim and Chuck, and it's brought their painting to life in a way that's completely different from just seeing it hanging on a wall. It's clear that whoever painted it must have stood here on the riverbank and looked at that view. They must have. And we know that that's exactly what Sisley did. He lived here, he painted so many views of his hometown and of this river. It's really encouraging. It's not hard and fast evidence, though. Encouraging, but we still need quite a lot more.
If we're to convince the Sisley Committee Kim and Chuck's painting is genuine, we need concrete evidence. I'm trying to track the provenance of the picture as far back as possible, hopefully to Sisley himself. We know Kim and Chuck bought the painting from an auction near Chicago in 2014. They contacted the seller, who told them they'd inherited the picture from their grandfather, a man named Dr. Ernst Donath, who died in 1983. So, who was Ernst Donath? Records show he worked in the US as a chemist and had emigrated from Germany after the Second World War. Is this how a painting bearing a German label ended up in America? Delving deeper, Ernst Donath's name appears in the records of a top-secret US intelligence program known as Operation Paperclip. He was one of 1,600 scientists recruited from former Nazi Germany by the US government after the war to work in military technology and the space race. Many were former members, some were former leaders of the Nazi Party. But not Donath. It turns out he had Jewish heritage. So precisely when did Ernst Donath leave Germany for America? And crucially, could he have brought the painting with him? To find out, I've asked the help of Professor Tony Kushner. I'm meeting him at the Wiener Holocaust Library in London, one of the world's leading archives of the Holocaust and the Nazi era.
I've been digging into the past of our painting and investigating one of its owners, Ernst Donath, who was a scientist in Germany during the Second World War, but then he was part of something called Operation Paperclip.
Operation Paperclip was an astonishing idea of the American government to recruit leading Nazi scientists to help the American economy and the military after the war.
Ernst was in a very difficult position, though, wasn't he? Because he was part Jewish himself and was in real danger. He was something that was called a Mischling.
Ernst was a Mischling. He was a Mischling of the first degree, which meant he had two Jewish grandparents. And this put him at particular risk. In January 1942, the Nazis decide to implement the final solution, in other words, the extermination of all Jews. And they define what's going to happen to first-degree Mischlings as follows. Persons of mixed blood of the first degree will, as regards the final solution of the Jewish question, be treated as Jews. Any person of mixed blood of the first degree to whom exception from the evacuation is granted will be sterilised.
Oh, it's just utterly chilling, isn't it, to hear that and to see it written in black and white. And Ernst was one of the exempted, one assumes, because he was useful to the Nazis as a scientist.
Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't always work that way, but Ernst is one of the lucky ones who is fully exempt from that.
We've managed to obtain Ernst Donath's unpublished memoirs from one of his relatives, and there's a passage which could shed light on Kim and Chuck's painting.
We know from Things that Ernst himself has written is that he definitely felt at risk. He talks about a fear of looting his possessions. He says, next to our shelter in the house in the sub-basement, we and others from our house had some valuables there. It's very possible, quite likely, that these valuables he's referring to include the painting we're investigating. Would he have had time in Operation Paperclip to get his belongings together in an orderly fashion, or was it the Americans would say, right, you're off, and 2 days later he'd have to leave?
I think Operation Paperclip was a very considered operation so that he would have had time. They would have selected him, he would have been approved, he would have had time to think about his belongings and his family. So the short answer is yes, he would have had ample time.
Passenger records show Ernst Donath boarded a ship on the 4th of January 1947, bound for a new life in America. It's highly likely Kim and Chuck's painting came with him.
If it was in his possession at the time, it would indicate that certainly that he thought this painting was valuable. It doesn't prove that it was a genuine Sisley, of course. But it certainly does show that this painting went through one of the darkest and most horrifying times in our recent history.
Any artwork that emerged from Germany after the war needs to be carefully checked to ensure that it hasn't been reported as stolen by the Nazis. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, they began to systematically seize property from Jewish families, and throughout the war they looted treasures across Europe. Today, there are comprehensive records of the hundreds of thousands of artworks that they stole. Kim and Chuck's painting is not listed among them, so we can move on with our investigation.
We need to track the provenance of Kim and Chuck's painting further back in time. So I'm following up a key lead, the label on the back. There's an address on it which reads Kunsthalle Bremen, a renowned art gallery in the city of Bremen, a cultural hub of northwest Germany. Hot on the trail, I've come here in search of evidence. The Kunsthalle Bremen holds an impressive collection of European art, including many works by the Impressionists. I'm hoping to find out why Kim and Chuck's painting has a label with the gallery's name on it. So I'm meeting curator Dorothy Hansen.
Hello, Dorothy.
Hello, welcome to the Kunsthalle Bremen.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I first want you just to have a look at our painting. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, at the first glance, it looks like a Sisley.
Good start. It's the label, however, that we are really interested in. How does that strike you?
Well, immediately I see on the top left, Kunsthalle Bremen. So it's printed. And so it must be the official paper on which the people of the Kunsthalle Bremen were writing in the, I would say, in the first half of the 20th century.
What else?
Well, we see the word gut, Gutachten. That means an expert opinion written down as a certificate. And the handwriting is very typical for our director, Emil Waldmann.
Emil Waldmann was the director of the Kunsthalle Bremen between 1914 and 1945. On the label, Waldmann writes, "According to my knowledge, this work is by Alfred Sisley."
So how was he regarded? I mean, an opinion from this man, was that worth its weight in gold in the art world?
At that time, yes. He was especially interested in French Impressionist art.
That's a really warming thought, a proper, respected authority giving this a seal of approval. And what about the date? When was this issued?
On the top right, we can see two numbers, and I imagine it could be 1939. That would be in the period of his directorate.
The label confirms the painting is at least 80 years old, ruling out the possibility that it's a modern fake. Museum director Emil Waldmann even left instructions for labels of this kind.
Well, we have one letter of 1938, 1 year earlier, where somebody is asking for his opinion, and he says, Please glue this handwritten certificate on the back of your painting so that it cannot be abused and taken for another painting.
Well, that's interesting insight, because it pretty well looks like that's what's happened to this label. It looks glued on the back, following instructions.
Yes, that's correct. This label belongs to this painting.
I mean, for us, this is really positive progress. Our painting is blessed by a man who the art world listened to.
Back in London, I'm trying to track the provenance of the painting further back from 1939, when we know the director of the Bremen Art Gallery deemed the work genuine. I'm following up a lead that Kim and Chuck have turned up after trawling through old auction records.
So have a look at this. This is an auction catalogue, and the date is 1931. And when you read through the artworks that are on sale, it's just an extraordinary kind of who's who of the greats. There are Renoirs, Matisses, Cézannes.
This treasure trove of Impressionists was assembled by Dr. Hans Wendland, notorious as a key dealer of Nazi-looted art during the Second World War. Before the war, in 1931, in the Swiss town of Lugano, Wendland held an auction where a very familiar painting was up for sale.
Wendland had many paintings up for sale in this auction, including number 73, this one, by Alfred Sisley, called Moret-sur-Loing. So that sounds just like Kim and Chuck's painting. And when you look at the picture, there it is. Unmistakably, Kim and Chuck's painting.
Now we have documentary proof that art dealer Hans Wendland put the picture up for sale in 1931 as an authentic Alfred Sisley. The question is, where did he get it from?
There was something intriguing about the entry in the catalogue that caught my eye, which is this asterisk here. And what that asterisk means is that Wendland didn't own this Sisley. He was selling it on behalf of someone else. Was it Ernest Donath at the time who wanted Wendland to sell it for him? We've looked back as far as we can into who owned this picture, and there's no record of it, not in 1931. So that is a blank. So where does this leave Kim and Chuck's painting? Well, what we can say is that Kim and Chuck's painting definitely existed as far back as 1931. And that is only 32 years after Sisley died.
We're edging the provenance further back in time, but there's no record of who owned the picture in 1931, and there's a worrying annotation in the auction catalogue.
This note here next to the picture says Fällt aus, which in German means cancelled, which is another way of saying withdrawn from sale. So this picture, Kim and Chuck's picture, was in the catalogue, but then taken out before the sale. Why? Were there suddenly question marks about its authenticity? And when you start looking at other paintings like this Manet, for example, number 71, here we are again, Fällt aus, cancelled, withdrawn from sale. That wasn't sold either. And that particular Manet is not in the current catalogue raisonné. Was this a fake? Were there question marks over this? And what does that mean for the Alfred Sisley picture, which was also withdrawn? Wendland was clearly a very shady character, dealing in Nazi-looted art. He's clearly not someone whose reputation was of the highest order.
Our investigation has taken a troubling turn, and there's a worrying gap in the provenance between 1931, when Kim and Chuck's painting appeared in Wendland's sale, and the late 19th century, when Sisley was working in Moret-sur-Loing. It's the kind of gap that can raise alarm bells, and back in Bremen, I'm following up an ominous lead. Although Sisley enjoyed little commercial success in his lifetime, his reputation grew after his death in 1899. Might a forger have spotted an opportunity? Conservator Julie Thoren wants to share a disturbing discovery.
Hi.
This is a painting called Baumallee bei einem Städtchen, or Tree Alley near a town.
And it looks like a Sisley, doesn't it? Bright, crisp, green colours, pools of light. low horizon. So what's the story?
Yes, it came into our museum in 1937, and for a long time it hung as a Sisley.
So it was a fully accepted Sisley that hung on the wall here in this wonderful museum?
Yeah, all the time.
So what happened next?
In 2006, I discovered that Sisley's signature is part of an overpainting, which is on top of another signature.
So the Sisley signature of the painting that you received
Yeah.
in the 1930s and had been hanging on the wall proved not to be right.
Yeah.
And what was beneath?
I removed the overpainting, and underneath there appeared a signature by Paul Vogler, which is another artist.
I can see it. So
Yeah.
a minor impressionist,
Mm-hmm.
not a painter of the same stature as Sisley,
Right.
had painted this, and then someone had put a Sisley signature on top.
Yeah. Right.
Dastardly. How did it feel revealing the signature? I mean, what did you think?
Yeah, I was surprised.
I mean, and you can see it quite dramatically. Is that the remnants?
Yeah. I started to remove the overpainting, and when Paul Vogler's signature was visible and part of the wrong Sisley signature is still there, we decided to leave it as a document of this history of this painting.
It's a sort of memorial
Yeah.
to the fake that this was.
Yeah.
That is a disconcerting thought. All this time, all that 70-year period, this picture was hanging in an esteemed museum, fooling the experts, a work thought to be by Sisley, but it wasn't.
It's clear that a forger was active in the 1930s, passing off pictures by minor artists as those of the great Sisley. And it raises uncomfortable questions for Kim and Chuck's painting. Back in London, we've asked leading Impressionism expert Anthea Callan to join us at the gallery. I want her view on whether Kim and Chuck's painting might be the work of an imposter, perhaps even a fraudulent copy of a known Sisley.
If you remember in the letter from the committee, Kim and Chuck's painting and this one that they mentioned specifically, done by Sisley in 1888. It's the same scene, and this is what worried them.
The Sisley Committee flagged up this known work as a reason for rejecting Kim and Chuck's painting. It depicts exactly the same view, which led them to conclude this genuine landscape probably inspired Kim and Chuck's picture. Could it be that someone copied this authentic work? If this is the case, then the presence of the signature is a huge cause for concern.
So why do we have the Sisley signature? That is a real problem. It's a real problem because it does suggest, in fact, that whoever painted the picture, if it's not Sisley, was intending to dupe.
But there's a less sinister possibility. Could Sisley have simply painted another version of the same scene?
Clearly, Sisley has a feeling that this is a perfect composition in some way. Why shouldn't he be returning to it? I mean, why shouldn't it be some sort of thought process?
And is that what Sisley did? Paint the same versions of the same scene?
Oh, absolutely. Under different lighting conditions, different weather conditions, different seasons.
And in different styles?
Some could be obviously more finished, depending on what the artist was trying to do, and here that's definitely the case. If this is by Sisley, this would be a more finished variant of it. And there are other precedents for this too. Two further known works by Sisley, almost exactly the same scene, different times of day.
And actually, thinking about ours, Kim and Chuck's painting, like this one, is much looser and less finished. And then the known Sisley of the same scene is similar-ish to this one. Tighter,
Yes,
more finished.
Tighter finish, yes.
So that's encouraging, I'd say.
It is encouraging. It is encouraging.
I agree. And I think we need to bring some science to bear on this case, see where that takes us.
It's reassuring that there's a precedent for Sisley creating multiple versions of the same scene. But does Kim and Chuck's picture share the same pigments and painting techniques as other genuine works? Or will we find something rogue that suggests it's a fake? Back at the Courtauld Institute, Professor Aviva Bernstock is continuing her technical analysis of Kim and Chuck's painting. She's using imaging techniques to reveal what the eye can't see. Infrared and ultraviolet light can uncover clues hidden within the painting. Aviva is also using X-ray fluorescence, a non-invasive technique which is used to identify the pigments present. I'm hoping her research can answer a crucial question. How will the technical data from Kim and Chuck's painting compare to the Courtauld's own genuine masterpieces by Alfred Sisley?
It's good to be back, Aviva. Have you had time to look at and study our picture?
Yes, I have. I've been lucky enough to have access to a comprehensive technical report and technical study by Emma Janssen, who is a graduate student in conservation, which has allowed us to make comparisons of great value to this picture.
And what has that turned up?
Well, it's interesting that the materials used for this painting are closely similar to the boats on the Seine, for example, which is 1877.
When Fiona and Anthea saw Boats on the Seine at the Courtauld Institute, they spotted some stylistic similarities. It's encouraging that Aviva can back those up with technical similarities too.
There are some really interesting comparisons between the sky painted in the boats in the Seine and also the purple underpainting that's used in this painting, which seems to be something that Sisley used in the later part of his career. This sort of quite characteristic mixture of pinky purpley paint to mark out the composition.
This is really encouraging. Kim and Chuck's work is painted using an unusual technique that we know Sisley used. It's something we need to share with the Sisley committee.
What about the pigments themselves, though, the materials used? Is there anything that we can match to Sisley?
We need to be sure that Kim and Chuck's painting doesn't contain any pigments that only became available after Sisley's death in 1899. For example, the pigment titanium white only became commercially available in 1921. If Aviva has found any evidence of it here, there's no way Sisley painted the picture.
In fact, the pigments or the range of pigments used for this painting include vermilion, chalk, barium sulfate, viridian, cobalt blue, and other pigments that were used in the late 19th century. And there's nothing that really stands out as being 20th century, so there's no titanium white, for example.
Okay, so all the materials that we have in this painting are consistent with what Sisley was using?
Yes, the comparisons would suggest that.
Another result. Kim and Chuck's picture has all the hallmarks of a late 19th century Impressionist painter's palette. It's another reason for the Sisley committee to take a fresh look at it. But one of their biggest concerns was the unusual crisscrossed wooden panel known as a cradle it had been painted on. Can technical analysis explain why it might have been used?
Some of the technical imaging, so the infrared image shows, for example, that there's a damage on the right-hand side and that there are splits which maybe led to the panel being cradled.
Under infrared light, you can clearly make out the hard lines that reveal where the wooden panel has split, requiring a repair.
It's not really clear whether it was bought cradled, but it seems unlikely that it was bought cradled if it was slipped into a special painting box and used to paint on site.
If the wooden strips that form the cradle were added later and the painting was originally done on a simple panel, then this is good news. There are several examples of genuine Sisley works on panel, meaning Kim and Chuck's picture becomes less of an anomaly.
You're very good at finding reasons for paintings not being what we hoped for. But I must say, I'm encouraged by what you've just said.
With Philip feeling more positive about the prospects for Kim and Chuck's painting, I've come to Paris for a rendezvous with the Sisley Committee. They've agreed to review the case and examine the picture for a second time, along with our dossier of evidence. I've arranged to meet Kim and Chuck in the Saint-Germain district before we part with their painting. We have got the painting, we've got our dossier of evidence. So the next stage is to submit all that to the Sisley Committee. They are quite a secretive organisation, so much so that we can't even film the building where they work. And they will then look at it and come up with their verdict.
It's been a fun ride, a very fun ride, and we're anxious to see what they decide.
And are you feeling optimistic?
Absolutely.
That's the spirit.
Yes.
Well, look, fingers crossed.
Sounds good.
Okay, sounds good.
With the painting safely lodged with the Sisley Committee in Paris, all we can do is wait. Back in London, we're taking stock.
Well, I think we've taken this as far as we can go. And thinking back over what we've learned, we had a mountain to climb.
The committee had made it very clear that they didn't like it, and they gave their reasons.
They thought the colours were too monotonic.
The cleaning of this picture has transformed it. It's almost as if the clouds have opened. We can now see everything in a sort of high key of sunlight.
They had concerns about the cradled panel.
Eviva has spotted cracking in the panelling. Now, that could explain the cradling on the back. It was added later in order to conserve it. And we do know that Sisley worked on normal panels. That's progress.
We have found enough fresh evidence to warrant the committee having another look at the picture. And we've charted the journey of Kim and Chuck's painting through the murky waters of Nazi Germany. And fortunately, it doesn't appear to have been caught up in that.
We managed to identify the label on the reverse. It's from a respectable museum. It's a stamp of approval in 1939.
And we managed to trace the provenance of the picture all the way back to 1931 in that auction catalogue. That's just 32 years after Sisley's death.
It seems to me now that we have done all that we can. We've reopened the case. We now need to see what they think of our appeal.
After 2 weeks of deliberations, the Sisley Committee have made their decision. Kim and Chuck are on their way to the gallery. We're all about to discover whether a painting they bought as a landscape merely in the style of Alfred Sisley is in fact a genuine work by the master impressionist.
Hello, Kim. Hello, Chuck.
Hello.
Hi, nice to see you again.
Are you ready?
This is it.
As we're ever going to be.
So I've got the verdict in here. How are you feeling at this particular moment?
Anxious.
So let me just remind you what's at stake. If this is by Sisley, a greatly rated and desired impressionist painter, it could be worth £250,000, quite possibly more. However, if it is not by Sisley, if it is by some imitator who's trying to make us think it's by Sisley, then I'm afraid only a fraction of that. A few £100, perhaps low thousands at best. So quite a difference.
Quite a difference.
Shall I?
Please. I feel like we need a drum roll.
Comité Alfred Sisley, it says at the top. Further to your request, the Comité Sisley has re-examined carefully the oil on canvas attributed to Alfred Sisley, Paysage à la rivière Moret-sur-Loing. We've noted that the painting had been cleaned, which has improved the visibility of the signature. New comparisons with original works have been carried out. A very careful consideration was given to the documentation provided. However, the Comité Sisley has decided to maintain the opinion expressed in its letter dated February 2015. The painting referred to here above will not be included in the supplement to Alfred Sisley's catalogue raisonné, now being prepared by the committee. We regret the disappointment which will greet these conclusions.
Oh, Kim and Chuck, I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry, I feel the same way.
I'm so gutted for you.
Oh.
And also, we've been there.
We have been there.
We saw it and we loved it.
I'm a bit sad for Sisley, because I really did think that it was something that we were going to bring to light for the art world, but...
Yes, I mean, we certainly felt, didn't we, that whoever painted this went to Moret-sur-Loing and saw it. Sadly, according to the committee, not Sisley.
So your attachment to it is no less?
We'll take it home and put it back in its frame and hang it back in the place where it was, and we have a great story to tell about it.
I'm so disappointed for Kim and Chuck. You know, you'd think it would get easier after all these years on Fake or Fortune, but it never does. Reading out a letter with a verdict like that and seeing their disappointment, even though they were putting a brave face on it. They are just the loveliest couple. It was a joy doing this investigation with them, and I'm only sorry we couldn't give them the verdict they wanted. In the end, it was a huge disappointment for them.
The Sisley Committee's conviction that the painting is not authentic means the dark arts are in play. The fact that this work was signed Sisley and in 1931 made it into an auction catalogue masquerading as a work by the artist means it is a forgery.
We were dealing with the work of a really cold-blooded faker, someone probably long dead now, who sought to deceive and nearly got away with it. And although I feel really sorry, as you do, for Kim and Chuck, at least they were taken in by a professional, someone who knew what they were doing. And who knows, perhaps one day we'll be able to put a name to this faker. I mean, the story need not stop here.